Chapter 350, Watch Me, Flame Killer Black Dragon Wave. Ah, this stage is an old friend. Ted laughed as the iron gate rattled open. A clumsy troll loped out. Its gray skin was rough and pitted like concrete, its body short and squat, its huge, hair-covered feet planted like boulders. It looked like a hill giant among trolls, the kind that lives in the mountains. Its head was oddly shaped like a vertical potato, and it carried a club nearly 1.5 meters long, making it look both brutish and dim-witted. Ah! The troll bellowed the instant it saw Ted, stamping the ground and charging with its club raised. Ted merely flicked his wand, and a thin sheet of ice formed on the floor. The troll stepped onto it and whoosh, did a perfect split. A flawless split. Anyone who'd never spent years in dance class wouldn't know how impossible that looked. The troll's knees buckled, it foamed at the mouth and collapsed in agony. Wow! Ted's way of clearing a stage is a bit unorthodox, one commentator cried. Clever, very clever. That was over before it even began, said another. Ted is amazing. I'm already in love with him, a female commentator swooned. The chat exploded with shocked reactions. Hold her down, quick. Give her a sedative. She's under a spell, scrolled across the screen. For Ted, trolls were old hat. For most of the other champions, they were terrifying. Trolls had magic resistance level 2 and could take a beating. Many of the champions were still hard-pressed. Ted, who'd fought trolls many times and even kept one, knew their habits and cleaned the stage quickly. He then took down a gargoyle and a dozen kobolds led by a hill giant while other champions struggled. Crumb wiped sweat from his brow. His robbing was ragged. Fleur, uninjured, had several summoned creatures flattened and rubbed her temples against the rebound. Ron's Kamen Rider-style armor was dented and scorched. A single troll swing could have taken his arm off if not for the reinforced plating. Hermione used a healing spell to recover some stamina. Malfoy sat on the ground, working on a bruise on his thigh with restorative magic that chewed through his reserves and barely eased the swelling. The gargoyle that followed had magic resistance level 4. Ted had to conjure rocks and smash it. The hill giant-led group of kobolds was more dangerous than the solitary kobolds people imagined. Alone, they were pest-sized, but in number and under a powerful leader, they were vicious. Spears, grappling hooks, ambushes. 2 more champions fell to that raid. The livestream comments blew up. Viewers were seeing the brutal side of the world of monsters. The International Confederation of Wizards had long urged wizards to unite through something like MagicNet Utopia. This broadcast made the need painfully obvious. The next stage introduced a kobold warlock. Kobolds look like small lizard folk, yet bark like dogs, hence the name. Unlike Murloc casters, who tended to know only a couple of water or ice spells, this kobold had a surprising arsenal, 6 or 7 spells. The warlock ambushed Ted, but his fireball couldn't break Ted's defenses. You like playing with fire, huh? Ted taunted. Firewall. A circular wall of flame sprang up and contracted. Kobolds squealed and dodged the rising heat, huddling together. The ground glowed crimson. Flame shock. A massive column of fire, several meters across, shot to the arena's high ceiling and incinerated the kobolds in an instant. That magic is so powerful, the commentators gushed. Besides frost, Ted's got serious fire magic. The kobold warlock wiped out another champion. The female dolphin champion was hit by a fireball, trapped in a web spell, and finished off as kobolds swarmed her with shovels and pickaxes. The number of remaining champions dwindled to 9. Next came 3 giant axe taurines, 3-meter-tall, hunched, bull-like brutes with backward-bending legs and 2 massive hooves, each gripping a giant rusty iron axe. They were berserkers. Their magic resistance wasn't huge, and fast casting could restrain them, but a charging taurine up close was deadly. Malfoy was eliminated here. 1 swing and his brains would have been on the floor if the camera hadn't cut away. A thunder lizard followed, a 3 to 4 meter long lizard-like beast with a horned nose that discharged lightning. Jerry tried and failed. His backstab opened only a bloody hole before a lightning bolt struck him and his body smoked out. Then came a 2-meter fire element floating off the ground that dispatched Hermione, who had already exhausted herself. The following gate opened onto 4 elementals: earth, water, wind, and fire, an entire set. Ron, whose armor was half blackened from previous fights, swore and cursed, "Are they messing with me?" The four elements surrounded him like vicious gang leaders cornering a school kid. At that point, only Ted and two other Hogwarts champions remained. Neville, wrapped in golden flames that healed his burns and frostbite, climbed on with grim determination. The next opponent, a shriveled floating lich, an undead mage formed from the corpses of magical races or wizards. It cast a barrage of debilitating curses, visual obscurity, poison mist, fatigue trap, willpower weakening, ray of enfeeblement. If many adult wizards faced that barrage, they would crumble. Only those with unique skills and iron will could withstand it. Neville's golden fire cut through the gray mist, and his wand became a gilded greatsword. "Treacherous scoundrels, evil scourges, for Hogwarts!" he cried, and dispatched the lich, but not before it had sent another champion down. By now, most competitors were at their limit. The level 11 lich was brutal. After that came beasts of all kinds. A displacer beast, a big leopard with tentacles that created convincing illusions, a poison sac panther that could release deadly venom, a stag-headed withered treant made of dead branches and antlered skulls, which commanded swarms of vines, a barbarian beastmen squad, 2-meter-tall brown brutes working in seamless ranged and melee combos, and a griffon that could fly and shred almost anyone. One by one, champions fell. The displacer beast bested Harry, the poison sac panther poisoned Neville, the treant took Fleur, it seemed unaffected by charm, the beastman eliminated Crumb, and the griffin tore apart Ilvermorny's oddly described muscular competitor. Ted was exhausted after the griffin. He still had magic left and ways to recover it, but the mental fatigue was real. He didn't think anyone else could beat the griffin's stage solo, yet he couldn't stop climbing. It had become addictive, like opening a series of blind boxes. Just a little further, 2 more floors, he told himself. When the iron gate opened again, Ted almost laughed with disbelief. A beholder rolled out, 1 giant central eye, a mouthful of sharp teeth, and 5 eye stalks, each darting independently. A level 14 aberration. Ted threw up an ice wall to block the eye beams, then conjured a thick mist to cloud the arena. The fight lasted 8 minutes, the longest Ted had fought. The beholder was terrifyingly intelligent for a monster. Its tactics were varied and sharp. Eventually, Ted dropped a large-scale blizzard. The cold defeated it. He let out a long breath and rested several minutes before continuing. "I don't believe it. What else have you got? Bring it on," he muttered. The next gate groaned open, and a giant creature squeezed out. It unfurled its wings and shot into the sky. A dragon, Hungarian horntail, filled the arena. It was massive, space-wide, with dozens of meters of vertical room. The crowd rumbled. "Damn it! I'll fight you to the death! Dragon Slayer magic!" Ted shouted. He raised his wand, and, to everyone's shock, a long black dragon surged from behind him, dozens of meters long, its scales midnight black. The judges' faces mirrored the audience's bewilderment. The Patronus-like black dragon did not attack the horntail. Instead, it plunged toward Ted in a burst of magic, drilled into his skull, and merged with him. From the stands, the duel became almost incomprehensible. A torrent of magic, then Ted ascending and engaging the Hungarian horntail in brutal close-quarters combat. He snapped off more than half the horntail's spikes, sent scales flying, and finally dragged the beast to the ground and pounded it into submission. In less than 5 minutes, he had caved in its skull. The live stream went silent. The spectacle had shifted from graceful spectacle to raw wrestling, 2 titans grappling, roaring and screaming. All of Ted's magic burned out like a spent torch. He leaned on his knees, gasping, and then forced himself upright. What else is there? He thought, eager to see more. The judges panicked. Karkaroff barked into a microphone. "Quick, prepare the next stage. He's going to break through." They had only set up 99 stages. All the other champions had been knocked out before stage 70. Ted had somehow climbed through more than 20 extra stages, breaking beyond the planned progression. The panel scrambled to improvise. Ted climbed again, complaining to himself about the interminable stairs. After 5 more minutes, he reached the next level. The iron gate clattered open, and 2 Hungarian horntails squeezed out. "Seriously? Are you kidding me? I'm done. I surrender." Ted laughed, part incredulous, part exhausted. 2 dragons at once was clearly beyond what the organizers had intended. The competition ended in an awkward hush. Champions, audience, judges, even commentators were left speechless. then awkwardly switched to advertisements while everyone absorbed what had just happened. Ted's victory was unquestionable. Billy, the muscular Ilvermorny competitor, took second place after an explosive late showing. Crumb finished third, Fleur fourth, Neville fifth, Harry sixth, and a long-legged woman from South America seventh. 7 more champions would compete in the final next month. 2 were considered dark horses: Billy, whose combat power had unexpectedly surged this stage, and the lanky South American woman who'd quietly beaten several opponents despite her nation's team being generally weak. Hogwarts had 3 champions advance to the final, but Hermione was still displeased. Thanks to reader Xiao Yao Luo Xian Ren Churi Tian for the 1,000-point reward. Thanks to reader Zhongji 14159 for the 200-point reward. Thanks to Nanyo Chaomujiziyugi, Bai Wu He, and Mobius for the 100-point rewards. Happy National Day to everyone. Don't forget to cast your monthly vote. 362, remembering Dumbledore. To be honest, Hermione could accept losing. Their combat ability had improved a great deal over the past 2 years training with Ted, but they had never set out to be combat aurors. Power in a fight was not their main goal, so she could accept being knocked out in this round. She had done everything she could. The last 2 rounds had been brutal, sustaining injuries, relying on sheer grit to barely make it through. In the end, she'd simply hit her limit. Even without monsters, she would have collapsed from drained magic and exhaustion. There was nothing to blame herself for. The Hogwarts younger students treated Ron and Hermione like heroes. Earlier, worried about upsetting their condition, they hadn't dared get too close, only shouting, "Go, go," and then scattering. Now that Ron and his friends had finished their mission, the kids gushed like idol worshippers, lifting them up, cheering, carrying them into the Great Hall and running laps around it. Looking on, it was almost as if someone was about to sacrifice Ron to the river. Hermione herself was surrounded by a swarm of girls. Aside from a few dorm mates, she hadn't been particularly popular with other girls. Peers often resent someone who's too outstanding. But now they clustered around her, shouting and jumping, praising her as if words were cheap. Getting this far was like climbing a hard slope. There were higher peaks ahead, but reaching this ledge was worthy of admiration. There was, however, one thing Hermione couldn't accept: losing to Fleur. She had given everything, no regrets, but Fleur had advanced. It infuriated her. Tugging at Ted's sleeve, tears ran down her cheeks. Her small face looked pitiful, utterly undone, an expression Hermione rarely showed, fragile as blossoms in the rain. How was Ted supposed to comfort her? Fleur's charm had tipped the scale. Of course Fleur passed. Her intelligence losing to an opponent's charm was the sting Hermione found hardest to bear. Ted hesitated, then picked her up. Sometimes action was worth more than words. He kissed her, simple, direct. If her magic was depleted, a little closeness might help restore it. If you can't be strong, top up what you lack. Let Hermione know. Outside the competition, she was still a winner. Ding. Task completed. Triwizard Tournament 7, Tower of the Endless, red. Obtained 21,000 experience. Cards, Tower of Babel, red. Greater Maze spell, a land card. Ted had no idea what use it had. Could it ascend to heaven? Were there cat fairies or gods there who could repair Dragon Balls? The second card, however, was a spell. Greater Maze spell. Spell card usage. Banishes the target into an extensive planar maze. The target cannot escape until an exit is found or 10 hours pass. Cooldown, 30 days. Note, ensure the target cannot move quickly when casting. A red spell card, its effect was huge. If used by surprise, even Dumbledore could be caught. Trapped in a planar maze, finding an exit would be almost impossible. 10 hours of control. Too strong. Ding! Task triggered. Triwizard Tournament 8 Ultimate Battle. You have passed the 6th round. Awaiting you is the final challenge. Overcome dangers in the maze, defeat the other champions, and become the strongest. Only the ultimate champion will receive the final accolades. Goal: pass the 7th round and become the ultimate champion. Reward: 30,000 experience. Card 7 Champions Trial, purple. Forgive me, host, it's the last round. The judging panel wasn't planning more schemes for the finale, but that was for later. Easter was in 2 days. Easter hadn't been a big celebration at Hogwarts before, but this year, teachers and delegates from 7 schools were present. It had to be grand. Professor McGonagall took it seriously, checking everything from menus to decorations. The Triwizard Tournament ended next month. This would be the last festival all the teams spent at Hogwarts together. Just as everyone settled into feasting and enjoying the company of long-distance lovers, Ted and his friends made their appearance. Every holiday, the students expected Ted to perform. Without him, they felt naked, like crabs with fleas crawling over them. So, of course, Ted showed up, baton in hand. He led the way in sunglasses, a black outfit, shiny leather shoes, and a ridiculous top hat that could hide a rabbit. Behind him, Ron, Neville, Jerry, and Malfoy were all in black, carrying a coffin on their shoulders. They marched in step to the music, 3 steps forward, 2 back, swaying as they entered. Do-do-do-do-do-do. It was the coffin dance. A piercing swanna blast cracked through the hall like an electric current into the skull, sending a shiver through everyone. The students twisted and swayed to the driving beat and the ecstatic dance of Ron's quartet. Professor McGonagall's wineglass clattered to the floor. Ding, talent, otherworld knowledge, triggered. Discovered, magic card, Swords of Revealing Light, blue. Magic card Swords of Revealing Light records the method to create the magic card Swords of Revealing Light. Requires 530 experience to exchange. Magic cards? Yu-Gi-Oh? Ted's system could even teach the creation of magic cards. A burst of understanding swelled in his mind. When he opened his eyes a little later, he couldn't help smiling. This month's Otherworld knowledge taught how to make the Swords of Revealing Light. It summoned 3 light swords that formed a seal, isolating inside from outside for 3 minutes. During that time, neither side could attack the other. But the bigger prize was the method, the knowledge of how to create magic cards. Ted already had a number of spells. If he turned them into cards, couldn't that bypass the usual limits of magical power? It was a huge opportunity. He planned to experiment carefully. Over the next days, Fleur tried to court Ted more aggressively. After all, time was short and she wanted to accelerate her conquest. But Hermione clung to Ted like a mother hen, practically inseparable, which made Fleur's work difficult. So Fleur brought a little mer-person, Ellie, along, 2-on-1. Ellie was naive about human life, often bewildered and innocent, which could be very effective. Hermione wouldn't be angry at a harmless airhead. Between them, Hermione couldn't watch everything closely. Ted, meanwhile, worked on making the magic card, testing materials and processes. This time, the judges didn't bother with an ideal land stage. The final battle would be in reality, with full scenery. A large area between the school, the Black Lake, and the Forbidden Forest had been cordoned off and transformed into the final arena. In Nocturne Alley, a gaunt wizard in a black robe, his chest thin and exposed, was forcing a dark wizard to submit with legitimacy. 2 months earlier, the man had been a vagrant in Southampton, too frightened to use magic. Then his former master returned, resurrected, and punished him with the Dark Mark, issuing orders he couldn't refuse. He'd been trying to escape the enemies his past misdeeds had made, but his resurrected master's command left him no choice. For 2 months he'd moved in secret, collecting information, waiting to be summoned. After extracting what he needed with his wand, pressed to the prisoner's forehead, he cast Imperio, another pawn secured. The Dark Lord's task required many such pawns. The man told himself to purge his panic and resentment by force. If the Dark Lord's nonverbal legitimacy saw through him, he knew he wouldn't die quickly. By May 10, the final arena was mostly finished. Magical traps, strange creatures, and mechanisms only needed fine-tuning. The judges announced the rules for the final round. Dumbledore, wearing his small hat, spoke calmly. In the final match, all remaining champions are competitors against each other. The match will only end when there is only one person left in the competition venue. And to prevent the match from dragging on, the competition venue will shrink over time. Ted thought, shrinking circle and running from poison, this is PUBG. He also had the odd thought that Dumbledore's hair seemed thinner every day. The old man was under a lot of pressure. Perhaps he'd become stronger for it. The 7 remaining champions exchanged resolute looks. Even having seen Ted's performance on the previous round's video, they were unshaken. Any champion who would falter because an opponent looked too strong had already been eliminated. Crumb, Fleur, Neville, Harry, Each had fought relentlessly to get here. The judges had chosen only true fighters for the final. The elders on the panel shared satisfied looks. With these last champions, the tournament had been worth it. No matter the final outcome, we are proud of you. Dumbledore concluded, and thunderous applause rose. The live broadcast window filled with comments. After half a year, the Triwizard Tournament had reached its climax. 49 champions selected from magical schools worldwide, and only 7 remained. In a few days, the final would be decided. May 23rd dawned bright and mild, the perfect day for a decisive battle. The 7 champions were led to separate entrances around the massive maze. Inside, they could use any non-lethal, non-permanent magic to defeat the others. Ted took a deep breath, waved at the filming snitch, and stepped in. By late May, the trees had put out new branches. Tender green leaves brushed the sky. The maze was made from countless hedge shrubs. Ted reached out to test if the hedge was just a hedge. If it were ordinary, the maze would be pointless. He pushed aside the shrubs, but they grew and braided around his arm. He pulled back fast. Of course, the judges wouldn't leave such a low-level hole. But you can't stop normal methods. I'm not normal, he said, and took out Softy. He squeezed it, soft, squishy, and threw it at the hedge. If the hedge wanted to tangle everything that touched it, fine, let it tangle Softy. Softy swelled where it left his hand, blossoming into a giant green jelly 2 or 3 meters across. It smashed into the hedge. Countless branches shot out, coiling tightly around the jelly, Evastep, then began to digest it. The hedge might as well not exist. Outside the arena, the judges covered their faces, looking like portraits of agony. Karkaroff barked, "Foul! Foul! Disqualify him!" Comments streamed across the live feed, some absurd and mourning. Both actors who played Dumbledore have passed away. We thank both old gentlemen for their classic contributions to film and television. Death is not the end, only the beginning of another path. 3. Happy National Day. Take the day off, by the way. Happy National Day. Take the day off, by the way. Finally, a new month has arrived. The next issue of Otherworld Knowledge is coming soon, and I need time to digest it properly. Chapter 352. The chapter title was wrong in the last chapter. The venue for the final was a massive hedge maze, heavily expanded by an undetectable extension charm. Once inside, the interior turned out to be more than 5 times larger than the exterior. From above, the maze looked like a giant flattened pancake, the people inside like tiny black sesame seeds. If it had been winter, you might very well have run into Jack Torrance in there. Madame Maxime had once suggested placing magical items in the maze to arm the champions for their final battle. After discussion, the idea was scrapped. Item combat could give an enormous advantage to a lucky competitor, as had happened to Ron in earlier rounds. Instead, the judges filled the maze with large numbers of monsters and traps to challenge the champions and keep things fair. Once the 7 champions entered, they all met obstacles. That was the judges' way of asserting control. Only Ted, who took an unconventional route by literally walking through walls, remained unbothered, something that worried the judges. Unlike the original tale, though, there was no goblet of fire at the heart of the maze to grant instant victory. Ted's ability to phase through walls and houses didn't win him anything by itself. You had to eliminate everyone else or outlast them to claim the crown. Fleur used her usual tactic, trying to charm monsters into fighting for her. The judges had anticipated that and made the creatures harder to control. Still, Fleur had prepared. She carried devices to boost her charm and scented potions for confusion and hypnosis. So she managed to secure her first familiar, a blast-ended Scroot. Hagrid-bred and resembling a giant terrestrial hermit crab, it fought well, breathed fire, and had excellent defenses. Its only drawback was the smell, like rotten fish and shrimps on a wet market stall. Fleur couldn't resist gloating. Didn't expect that, did you? Crumb advanced rapidly, toppling a stone golem in 30 seconds with 6 spells. The golem had decent magical resistance and enormous physical defense. Apart from being slow, it had no glaring weaknesses. After subduing it, Crumb pulled out a brass compass with a single pointer and no markings. Harry, who had reached the final round, felt unrestrained. She'd nearly been eliminated in the previous round and had survived by sheer will. Now that she'd made it this far, winning or losing mattered less. She wanted to show everything she had. Her fighting was spectacular. A series of flashy, compact combos left an armored catfish crawling in the mud with a swollen head. Sirius and Miss Olivia, watching the live broadcast, were delighted and sent a wave of rewards. The announcer thanked Mr. Padfoot for gifting Champion Harry a firebolt. Sirius even improvised a rap. He's here, he's coming with gifts. He's here, he's stepping on auspicious clouds and coming in. Big Brother Heaven, Big Brother Earth, Big Brother can support heaven and earth. Big Brother Wind, Big Brother Rain, Big Brother can summon wind and rain. Ted, slacking off and watching the feed from the back end, was dumbfounded. Where did they find such a thing? Neville, wielding a golden holy sword, slew a stump monster and pressed deeper. Billy, the effeminate strongman from Ilvermorny, also handled his opponent with 2 spells. The earth goblin he faced looked ordinary, but was a skilled subspecies. Fighting it was still dangerous. Luli, the long-legged samba dancer from South America, perhaps the weakest of the 7 in raw power, had nevertheless earned her place in the final and quickly defeated her foe. Compared with earlier rounds that had been comedic, tense, tearful, or wildly surprising, this final was a personal showcase. Champions had to use their advantages to survive the maze and find opportunities to eliminate each other. Everyone could be hunter and prey. How to find others without being found required thought and stamina. Monsters appeared every 2 or 3 minutes, many creatures once known only from books, and some of the newer, more dangerous beasts. As the first circle shrank, the dissipating outer maze forced champions toward the center. From the stands, the 2 nearest competitors were a few turns apart, and yet they carefully avoided each other. The creatures inside were lethal. An owlbear, fur and feathers, half bear, half owl, stood 8 feet tall and weighed 1,500 pounds. One slap shattered Crumb's shield charm. A giant mantis, immune to mental effects and camouflaged to its surroundings, ambushed Fleur. Its forelegs were huge scythes. One of Fleur's temporary familiars sacrificed itself to take the hit. Otherwise, her protective device would have activated and eliminated her. Because the mantis was an insect, it was impervious to her charm, her worst nightmare. A bog frog, a mud-covered monster with walrus-like tusks, secreted a slippery fat over its body that reduced damage from physical attacks. Many large creatures chewed on them only to suffer minor cuts. Harry encountered one of those indestructible bog frogs. Neville ran into a giant flytrap, a massive barbed vine plant whose adult mouth was 7 feet wide and weighed 9,000 pounds. Neville had only seen such a plant in animated atlases. He never expected to get chased by a living specimen. He hesitated to damage such a rare plant and ended up being chased all over the place. This round felt like a crash course in how to survive magical creatures in the wild. The livestream chat filled with viewers saying, "Noted, noted." Hopefully, they wouldn't take it as permission to slide tackle a tiger. By the third shrink, half the maze had already vanished. Champions began to encounter one another. The survivors were all strong in their own ways. Monsters alone couldn't decide the match. It still came down to direct combat. Billy and Harry met. With Transcendental Charm and Vibration Sense Charm active, Harry detected him 3 seconds early. She cast a silent Stupefy, followed by a massive magical blue fist a meter across smashing toward him. But Billy had amassed magical energy, apparently drawing on his team's support, and 3 layers of shield charm swallowed Harry's surprise Stupefy. He pointed his wand and fired an arm-thick spell at Harry's blue fist. Harry's combat ability was no joke. She'd been fighting since childhood, most often with Malfoy, and she had the experience, grit, and combat intuition to match. Her materialization skills and chaotic close-range bombardment style were disruptive. Even large magical creatures could be stunned by a flurry of blows. But Billy was something else. Despite his effeminate manner, his fighting was explosively brutal, perfectly matching Harry's intensity. His spells weren't polished like Hermione's, but he knew several peculiar, devastating incantations and could temporarily stimulate his own adrenaline, powering himself up like someone injected with fiery courage. Thigh-thick spells kept firing non-stop. They fought for 3 minutes, while the 20 meters around them were almost totally shredded, craters and cracks everywhere. Nearby champions drifted closer, hoping to take advantage. Eventually, the victor was decided. Harry, Her magic spent and body bruised and cut, collapsed when her legs gave out. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted. Her protective device triggered and she was teleported to the judging panel for treatment. Commentators lamented her elimination while praising Billy as a worthy combatant. The chat exploded. People called the clash terrifying and asked, incredulously, whether Billy was even a wizard. Harry's style was expected of her, but for a big man to use such a magical, relentless barrage, 2 shots a second for 3 minutes, was outrageous. Billy paused after Harry was teleported away, shook his head once, and calmly walked back into the maze. His composure drew shocked comments. In the stands, Dumbledore's expression darkened and Professor Geller stroked his beard. The loud duel drew other champions closer. Neville intended to check on the fallen woman, but, rounding a corner, found a different girl lying on the ground with what looked like a pool of blood beneath her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, anxious, and moved toward her. The moment he touched her, the South American long-legged Luli's eyes flashed a silvery white, and she squeezed a puffball-like plant sachet. A cloud of pink powder sprayed out. Neville's heart leapt, and then he fell into a dreamlike sleep. The live stream exploded with warnings. "Be careful. Don't go." From above, viewers could see that Luli had sensed Neville's approach through the lichens underfoot. She'd identified him somehow, feigned death, and used his kindness against him. The chat went wild with outrage. Despicable. First, the Hogwarts boxing champion had been eliminated. Now, even the savior? Only Ted remained. Luli squatted beside the sleeping Neville and said with a mock-innocent smile, "Oh my, what a kind boy. I'm so sorry, but Big Sister will make it up to you." She cupped Neville's face and kissed him. Some viewers softened, others remained furious. Ginny in the stands was incandescent. "Put Neville down, you." Fortunately, Neville's protective device had already detected his loss of combat capability and teleported him away. Otherwise, who knew what might have happened? Boys, when you're out on the field, remember to guard your hearts. Luli hadn't even enjoyed triumph for a minute before Fleur struck. Fleur had left her remaining temporary familiars planted dozens of meters away and used a spell to grow a pair of translucent butterfly wings, allowing her to float toward Luli and avoid the lichen's detection. Finite Incantatum broke Luli's protections, and a powerful Stupefy sent her flying 2 meters. The audience exploded with laughter and tears. She'd just ambushed someone and then been ambushed in turn. Karma, indeed. 3 champions had been eliminated. The circle shrank again, this time more quickly. Crumb, clutching his brass compass, was closing in on Ted. He'd been preparing for this since Christmas. The compass had been made to track Ted. It pointed in Ted's direction. Though the device suffered interference at times, within a kilometer it intermittently showed the bearing. Now Crumb had found his target. He wanted to prove he was the best. He deserved Hermione Granger. He couldn't say that aloud. He was dating a Gryffindor girl, and given Gryffindor temperaments, a confession like that would invite an immediate duel. "Crumb, we meet," he muttered, then strode into the open with a gloomy face and no intention of ambushing. Ambushing Ted within these few dozen meters would be suicide. No one could get the drop on him here. "Ted Epiphany, let's have a wizard's duel," he called out. 365. Hindrance. As the owner of Ideal Land, Ted naturally had a back door, direct access to the system's core. He could watch any match inside the arena whenever he wanted. He hadn't used it much before. With so many combatants, he couldn't possibly follow everything. He only paid attention when his friends fought well. But now there were only 7 competitors left, 6 if you didn't count him, so he could monitor everything in detail. He'd watched Harry and Neville lose and be eliminated. It was a pity. His companions had finally reached the later rounds and still hadn't crossed paths. Ted had wanted, more than anything, to duel Harry himself. When she used magic, he imagined shouting, "Potter, how dare you use the spell I invented against me?" A little fantasy of Professor Snape's come true. Still, Harry had shown herself, and in the end she lost from exhaustion after a brutal fight. There was no shame in it. She'd thrown out moves like Spiral Shuriken and the unfinished 100-form Guanyin. Against mindless opponents like trolls, she might have taken on 10 at once. Her opponent, however, was formidable and wore her down through direct confrontation. The defeat was deserved. Neville's loss, on the other hand, rankled. Ted had never expected that even with so much attention on him, someone would target Neville and do it so precisely, exploit his weakness, and lure him into a trap. That tall, leggy girl from South America, she really knew how to read men. And then Fleur had knocked her down. If you wanted to beat a woman, sometimes you needed another woman. Neville never even got to show off his carefully prepared new abilities. No one can beat me with my BGM, and I solemnly swear. He just fell into a beauty's arms and got a smacking kiss. Ted had wanted to see those new tricks. Now both friends were out, and, unexpectedly, Crumb had come looking for him. Well, since he'd shown up, Ted figured he might as well be polite. How did these people always find him? Like wolves on a trail? If he didn't give them a taste of their own medicine, they'd never learn that the Horse King had 3 eyes and Merlin owned 3 pairs of underwear. Watching Victor Crumb stride forward with all the gravitas of a champion, Ted smiled. "So you've been looking for me all this time? Is it never ending?" Ted teased. "You want to fight me? Do you have the strength, Crumb?" The two stood about 15 or 16 meters apart, bowed to one another, and the duel began. Crumb flicked his wand and a spell shot out almost silently. Ted's form blurred like an old TV screen and the spell passed through where he had been, striking the bushes behind him. A patch of enchanted shrubs withered and collapsed. Ted had tried walking through those bushes before. They were special, magically enhanced plants. To strip away that much at once was a neat dark arts effect, but a powerful spell is useless if it misses its mark. Ted laughed. The laugh made Crumb uneasy. He had opened the duel and expected to set the tone. He'd taken the first move, and it had been deflected. If he could end the duel immediately, or at least rattle Ted, it would be something. Instead, his opponent didn't even seem perturbed. He smiled and praised him. The humiliation was a sting that dredged up old grudges. Crumb unleashed 3 more spells in quick succession, one into the air, one to strike the ground a few meters in front of Ted, and one aimed right at Ted's face. The one in the sky exploded into a dome-like net, spreading out across a 10-meter diameter. The one hitting the ground boiled the earth, turning it into black, gaping mouths that lunged for Ted's feet. The middle shot detonated and split into 2, then 4, instantly filling the space around Ted. All 3 missed. Ted had vanished. Crumb looked to where Ted had been. Ted stood there, wand in hand, arms folded, still smiling, annoyingly calm. Crumb's aerial net should have interfered with apparition. Forcing it would risk splinching. He hadn't apparated, so how had Ted avoided the spells? 2 more volleys followed. Ted's responses were maddeningly casual. A stray glow from his wand deflected curses, his body flickered to avoid others, and his elastic magic shield, like a bubble, rebounded still more. No matter how furious Crumb's assault, nothing touched Ted. "I gave you a chance," Ted said. "You wasted it." "Looks like it's my turn." Ted extended his empty left hand. Different substances manifested on each of his 5 fingers. A ball of fire, a sphere of water, a chunk of stone, a small whirlwind, and a ball of black shadow. The 5 motes of magic swelled to the size of wash basins above his head, humming with power. From each orb, fist-sized elemental strikes began to rain down. Fireballs, ice arrows, fist-sized stones, wind blades, and shadow orbs. Crumb raised a stone wall and fled. In under 2 seconds, the 3-meter-high, 1-meter-thick wall collapsed under the elemental onslaught. Then dozens of smaller elemental spells chased Crumb like a machine gun spray. What kind of magic is this?" the technical commentator stammered. He knew theory, but he'd never seen anything like it. The old judges shook their heads in puzzlement. The 5 magic orbs were drawing ambient magic to fuel themselves, so Ted's personal energy drain was minimal. Even if Ted left, the constructs could keep operating for a very long time, maybe hours. In other words, Ted was still holding back. He hadn't even moved from watching Crumb's performance. Chased and nearly out of sight, Crumb gritted his teeth and made a desperate choice. Ted, relaxed, watched the show unfold, but suddenly Crumb blinked out of his place. In a flash, the ground beneath Ted shattered and a jagged black spike of smoky matter shot up. If Ted hadn't sidestepped, that thing would have seriously injured him. "Sneaky," thought Ted. "Never expected you, with those heavy brows and big eyes, to stoop so low." The attempt failed. The black spike collapsed into smoke and drifted back to Crumb. Half of Crumb's eye had gone pitch black. Dark purple runes spread across half his face, and his whole presence had turned eerie. Even the audience watching the live stream stiffened. What had happened to Krum? On the judge's dais, their gazes fixed on Karkaroff. He clenched his fists and lowered his head. He didn't know Krum's trump card, or perhaps he chose not to know. Durmstrang allowed the study of dark arts, but not everything was permitted. If he knew this move broke the rules, would he uphold justice and sacrifice his favorite pupil, or would he look the other way? Best, then, to pretend ignorance. The pupil had grown now and had his own secrets. Still, even Karkaroff hadn't expected this. This thing didn't feel like normal magic. It felt alien. On Krum's wand, a black, viscous substance like tar flowed down and merged with the smoking darkness. From behind him, over 2 meters tall, a savage canine apparition assembled out of that blackness. It let out a monstrous roar. The inky sludge on the ground rippled into dozens of smaller beasts that leaped toward Ted. Ted flicked his wand and the staff flared. Magic coalesced into a blade of light, an ethereal sword. It was like Neville's golden greatsword in principle, though Neville's was larger and imbued with holy magic. Ted's sword was pure magic, and he could alter its elemental attributes at will. With a flourish, he advanced into the mass of snarling beasts. The blue blade flashed to white as wind was infused into it. Its cutting edge rendered steel like tissue. With a few slashes, 4 or 5 of the black creatures were cleaved apart. But whenever the beasts hit the ground, they disintegrated into black smoke and drifted back into the mass of the large black hound. For the next few minutes, Ted was a blur, his sword changing colors and slicing through 70 or 80 evils. Each one fell and rejoined the whole. Killing them didn't reduce their number. If anything, the horde multiplied until the tide pressed forward like a frenzied herd. The giant beast seemed to grow impatient. How long would this go on? It lunged, its body erupting into thousands of smaller black forms midair. A dark cloud set to shred Ted to pieces. Ted's magic flared, and a long black dragon shot into the sky, scattering the swarm. The dragon's claws raked the massive beast, tearing it into 17 or 18 pieces. Black globs rained like hail onto the ground. Those chunks, large and small, contracted and retreated to Krum's form, reweaving into the dark runes. The corrupted force sensed its inferiority and withdrew. Krum's eyes stayed open, but his body went limp. He slumped unconscious, drooling. For reasons unknown, the protective device hadn't responded. The black dragon, a meter across at least, coiled above Krum and extended a claw toward him. Ted thought, whatever this is, and whatever world it came from, it's not good. Better not to leave it behind. The black substance oozed from Krum's body, fought against itself, then sank into the dragon's claw. The creature stuffed the corruption into its mouth, gnawed a few times, and swallowed, Black Dragon Devour. The dragon, a guardian god that consumed all evils to strengthen itself, ate the black filth. Ted waved casually to the hovering camera, then nodded toward the now still Krum and motioned to the judges to send someone to carry him away. The black tattoos had faded. Outside the shrinking maze, the demolition-like fight had already made the area compact, and the commotion would have been felt far beyond the arena. It was only natural that the remaining 2 warriors would be paying attention. Billy, the Ilvermorny champion, had arrived. At first glance, anyone would have been cowed by the sight of the black dragon guardian god cruising overhead. The older judges were now assessing the creature with astonishment. When Ted had demonstrated a black dragon fusion earlier, they'd dismissed it as youthful showmanship. Grand but gimmicky. Seeing it in full combat, lethal and mythic, had changed their minds. If it grew stronger by eating monsters, so much the more terrifying. Before Ted could move toward Billy, dark smoke began rising from the strong man's body. The muscular fighter writhed, mouth open, eyes rolling back, joints convulsing. A spiky, irregular sphere of black smoke formed above his head, undulating and shifting like a living thing. "Are you all dabbling in things from other worlds now?" someone muttered. Dumbledore stood up from the judge's box. "Obscurus," he called. Heads turned. Professor Geller in the stand sat bolt upright. He knew the Obscurus well. Obscurials, those who carried an Obscurus, rarely lived past 10 unless their talent was exceptional. Billy's earlier performance had not suggested such prodigy. Later his power had inexplicably surged, but that had nothing to do with being an Obscurial. Gellert had nurtured obscurials before. This did not add up. Billy had not been an obscurial. Then what was going on? The judges and commentators exchanged alarmed looks. This contest, already stretched between brilliant spectacle and dark anomaly, had just taken another unnerving turn. Sorry, lately I've been stuck with writer's block and always wait until the last minute. This chapter is finished. It's already 1 in the morning. Sigh. Black smoke belched from the body of the contestant called Billy, mixing with grease and dust into a strange, oily black substance. The live stream chat erupted. Crumb's earlier display, whatever that terrifying thing had been that seemed to possess him, had already sent chills through everyone watching, even scaring many little wizards who hadn't yet started school to tears. Now, less than a minute later, another horror had appeared. This one looked even more merciless, as if the man were about to collapse from the effort, sacrificing himself to summon some great demon. Could this world get any more chaotic? What more were ordinary wizards supposed to endure? The 3 commentators were speechless. If Crumb's incident had been explainable in some way, this was beyond comprehension. They stared at the screen, unable to form words. At the ministry, Cornelius Fudge, watching the final through his Ideal Land viewing glasses, jolted upright. For a moment he looked ready to intervene, then relaxed, remembering with a smile that this was Dumbledore's problem, not his. He eased back into his chair, shoes up on the desk, and settled back to enjoy the show. "Ha! Dumbledore, what are you going to do now?" he muttered to himself. On the judging platform, alarm spread. They all knew what an obscurus was. They had simply not expected to see one in the late 20th century, as if witch hunts were back in fashion. "What do we do?" Karkaroff demanded. He was oddly relieved. This American contestant's magic looked far more dangerous than whatever Crumb had used, and if blame could be shifted, so much the better. "We must save him," cried Madame Maxime, already raising her wand toward the maze. Other principals and professors moved to act. "Wait," Dumbledore said in a voice that shut the others up. "We cannot interfere. This is the Triwizard Tournament, a contract witnessed by the Goblet of Fire. If we break the terms and interfere, the backlash will fall on Ted and on us." "Trust Ted. He can still fight," someone said. Dumbledore knew well what an obscurus was. Decades earlier, in America, he had faced an obscurial, his nephew, who had surrendered fully to the destructive force within. The obscurus's power depended on its host's state. If the host retained consciousness, it could be controlled. The stronger the host's inherent magic, the stronger the obscurus. Negative emotion and raw magic fused to create a force that could annihilate matter and reduce spells to base components. And now Billy had clearly lost himself. He'd been behaving oddly since the match began. After he defeated Harry, both Professor Geller and Dumbledore had sensed something wrong, like someone under Imperio. If the host's consciousness was suppressed, the obscurus could erupt unchecked. Billy had also absorbed other contestants' magic. His power was now terrifying. The black smoke and oily matter poured across the arena like a descending storm. This obscurus differed from whatever had touched Crumb earlier. That had been some otherworldly thing. This was a purely magical phenomenon, a dark cloud that shattered shrubs and turned earth into dust. It disintegrated anything it touched and broke spells down to their most basic magic. When it swept near, Ted slipped into a wisp of clear wind and vanished from his original position, drawing the black mass away from the castle with him. That wind trick was no accident. Ted had developed a wind manipulation technique that let him fly without aid. As he led the obscurus away, he thought fast. If everything else failed, he could unleash the black dragon he'd been holding back. It might consume a lot, but it could buy him time. There were few options against a phenomenon born of magic and despair, but one idea came to him. He accelerated, gained distance, then landed and pushed a pulse of magic into the earth. Hogwarts mattered now because of its ley line network. The founders had spent centuries regulating the magical flows beneath the castle, setting nodes and building alchemical arrays that made the site the most important magic hub in Britain. Here, on his home ground, Ted could call on that infrastructure. A 30-meter alchemy array bloomed beneath his feet. Circles, squares, triangles, and lines linked and glowed as the array activated. The obscurus bore down on him with no mind of its own. Ted sealed it inside the array. The array isolated its interior so the Obscurus could enter but could not leave. Even its magic disintegration couldn't break the array fast enough. Ted could repair it as quickly as it was attacked. Trapped, the Obscurus could be studied. Ted began experimenting. Elemental spells, earth, water, air, fire, failed against it, corroding into base magic. Light and sound had no effect. But this Obscurus was different. Artificially created, the product of a host whose consciousness was suppressed and whose magic had been augmented. Ted had a plan, and he used the brief safety of the array to try it. He was one of the few who still practiced advanced alchemy. The art had been fading with each generation of wizards, much of their old knowledge lost. The commentators who understood even a fraction of what Ted did sounded stunned and then fell silent, sweating as they tried to explain something beyond their grasp. After a tense 5 minutes, the first fragment separated, a clump of black, granular, oily matter that Ted sealed in a vial of oil. He had isolated a specimen. The array, pushed to its limits, glowed fiercely as it began to decompose the Obscurus into base magic and raw emotional energy. Ted's other talent, magic conversion, purple, let him alter the properties of magic directly. He bridged the array and his own skill, converting and breaking the Obscurus down at its root. It was a brutal, direct tactic, not to withstand the vortex, but to strike at its center. The judges breathed, then exhaled in public relief. If Ted could contain and decouple the Obscurus, no one needed to die. For the first time in minutes, hope spread through the arena. Little by little, the dark cloud disintegrated. Ted worked the array until it strained under the load, Matt then adjusted and pushed more of his conversion to bear. Researchers would call it genius. On the field, it was simply Ted's mastery. Eventually, the black mass dissolved entirely. Billy was carried away, motionless and worse for wear. He might never fully recover his consciousness. The match continued. Now the safe circle had shrunk to a 20-meter radius and the poison zone closed in. Fleur, who had been hiding and watching, exhaled. Ted was unbeatable in that arena. The dragon he could unleash, the alchemy he could wield, and his uncanny tactics made direct confrontation hopeless. She had done well enough to be runner-up. She had to take another tack. Emerging from cover, she tried a feint, a raised wand, then a move meant to distract. Ted, reading the field, immobilized her with a precise spell. Fleur had expected that. The show was worth more than a quiet surrender. As Ted approached, she straightened, eyes glittering. "All right," she said softly. "I admit it. I've lost. Here, I'm your prisoner. You can do what you want." For a heartbeat, Ted, who had endured two brutal contests in one, was taken aback. Was this a scripted concession? The match was being broadcast to 100,000 viewers, though. He cleared his throat and leaned toward Fleur, eyeing the arena's empty, ruined landscape. "Don't be ridiculous," he murmured. "There are 100,000 people watching." Fleur pouted with mock-wounded pride. "What are you saying?" "I mean it. If there are too many people, wait until there are fewer." A faint silver light flashed in her emerald eyes. She was using her most dangerous charm, herself as the price. Fleur had not given up the contest as long as she could still bargain. She closed the distance, her breath scented faintly of orchids, and let her lips hover near Ted's. Ted felt the pull, the almost physical tug of the enchantment. He did not resist, or rather, his mind did not need to. He felt the lure and the danger both. With a casual motion, he yanked at the protective device clipped to her waist. Before she could react, Ted activated a short-range teleport and sent her tumbling elsewhere in the maze. He tossed the removed device aside and laughed lightly. "Good performance. Don't try that again." If he had lacked mental defenses, her charm might have worked. Ted was a mind mage. 7 or 8 layers of mental protection and multiple warnings shielded him from exactly this kind of assault. Had he been any less prepared, he might have been undone by a woman willing to stake herself and her reputation to alter the match. The maze hummed with the aftermath of dark magic, alchemy, and quick thinking. The Triwizard audience swallowed hard, watching as a champion's strange weapon, an Obscurus, was contained and dissected by an equally strange answer. A young wizard from another world, an alchemist who converted magic to its roots and turned terror into data. Just after Ted had dealt with the overwhelming black substance, everyone watching the match finally breathed. Then Fleur slipped in from behind, attempting a last-ditch sneak attack. For a moment, it looked as if the commentators were ready to crown Ted the undisputed Triwizard champion, until Fleur's maneuver changed everything. She sprang her trap. Ted froze, dazed and enchanted, and spectators watched in horror as she drew him face up, about to force a kiss. The commentators shrieked, "Ted's been defeated. He's been undone by feminine charm." A fangirl in the broadcast nearly burst into tears, screaming at the screen for him to wake up and not fall into the clutches of such a wicked woman. But with an almost insolent calm in his expression, Ted ripped off Fleur's protective device and stripped away her advantage, eliminating her outright. He had been pretending to be enchanted, playing the scene to the hilt. If it hadn't been live, with nearly 100,000 viewers and Hermione surely watching, he might have made the farce even wilder. "See," he might have said. "You all saw it. She kissed me herself. I had no way to resist." From Fleur's point of view, it was hard to tell who had been taken advantage of. She'd gambled everything and felt both exhilarated and humiliated when he revealed the ruse. Fleur teleported away stunned for a few seconds before she recovered enough to sneer. On the large live screen that hung over the hushed arena, Ted stood alone on the ruined field. "The Triwizard tournament is over," she said, "but our competition has only just begun." She could not hide the sour thrill in her voice. "I just love men who are immune to my charms," she thought. Madame Maxime hurried over, anxious. "Fleur, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Professor, really." Madame Maxime, towering and broad as ever but gentle, was quick to comfort her favorite pupil. "You still did well. Second place is excellent. Ted is simply too powerful on a different level. There's no shame in losing to him." Secretly, she wondered whether she herself could have beaten him. The boy still held too many secrets. Fleur was not disheartened. "He's outstanding, far beyond me. It's only natural he beat me. This only proves we made the right choice." Hogwarts erupted. The students howled and sang, half the school rushing about in delirious celebration. Even Professor McGonagall surrendered to a rare smile and used her wand to send up colorful fireworks, the air cracking and blooming with light. Professor Flitwick, Ted's head of house, was bouncing and shouting, "We won! We won!" Snape, in a dark corner with arms folded, watched with a look that precisely combined disdain and long suffering. That show-off Ted, pretending to be charmed so he could toy with a girl. What an embarrassment. Hagrid barreled into the crowd like a warm cyclone. He scooped up Madame Maxime in a surprised embrace and spun her twice as if he were a giant doing a triumphal twirl. Fleur felt the gust tangle her hair. Hagrid, hair slicked back, vest buttoned, iron belt gleaming and boots heavy, looked oddly dashing in his own hulking way. He offered her a shaky, heartfelt sentence. "Beautiful madam, may I buy you a drink to celebrate?" "Oh, of course," she answered, touched. Hagrid clasped Madame Maxime's hand and was about to go when he called back to Fleur. "Your performance was excellent, too. Congratulations on second place." Fleur smiled and wished them well as they strode away. Watching them, she wondered if the headmaster had come with a purpose and if he had already found his target. At the judges' table, the mood was relaxed and relieved. The past 6 months of competition, with all its strange trials, had come to a rousing conclusion. The final was the sort of spectacle that restored faith in the next generation of wizards, a spirited, magical duel among young people who might one day change the world. Old resentments over earlier scoring decisions dissolved in the cheer. Friendship first, rivalry second. Two men at opposite sides of the pavilion did not share in the general abandon. Dumbledore, elderly, well-traveled, and an unfamiliar, solemn professor named Geller exchanged a look. No words were necessary. They understood each other's meaning perfectly. That night was the feast of celebration. By dawn, delegations would begin to disperse, and the half-year of exchange would end. Many friendships had been formed, and many couplings made. The prospect of parting and long-distance relationships hung in the air like bittersweet smoke. Ted sang, first far away from home, which made some couples near tears. He switched to rabbit dance before the melancholy deepened. If it was the last night, everyone should enjoy it. The hall was full of linked arms and spinning bodies. After one set, Ted refused encores, nodded to Hermione and Harry, and slipped away. Fleur, watching him go, tried to follow, but Hermione stepped in front of her. "We can talk later. He has something important to do now." Hermione wasn't entirely selfless, perhaps a little, but she was right. The two bizarre incidents in the match couldn't be dismissed as entertaining footnotes. The Ilvermorny situation was especially troubling. An artificially enhanced Obscurus, a man named Billy lying unconscious in St. Mungo's, magic in his body dissipated, perhaps gone forever. If this was foul play, it would be monstrous. Worse, before the tournament, the teams had been bound by a contract that siphoned the magic of eliminated contestants to strengthen the survivors, presumably to create a powerful champion. Now that potent champion had been turned into a sacrifice. Would the remaining students be safe? None of it looked unrelated to the Ilvermorny delegation's presence and its head's odd behavior. Dumbledore had already tried to contact Ilvermorny across the ocean before the feast, but there had been no reply. Even so, action had to be taken. Ted was going to find out precisely what had happened. They arrived at the secluded garden near the edge of the grounds to find a scene already in motion. The Ilvermorny head, described earlier as hawk-nosed, had arranged a secret meeting with Karkaroff and the Uwagado headmaster to discuss the dark arts. The three had briefly allied during earlier rounds, and Karkaroff and the Uwagado headmaster thought they were being courted for favor. They went unsuspecting. Instead, the hawk-nosed man struck. Karkaroff was hit by a killing curse and fell at once. The Uwagado head dodged the worst, but then was struck by a horrid spell that blew off an arm. Dumbledore arrived at once, stepping between the hawk-nosed figure and the injured men. He managed to save the Uwagado headmaster and block the killer's attempt to finish them, and then engaged the attacker himself. Ted arrived soon after, expecting to confront a foreign professor bent on violence. He hadn't expected the name Dumbledore used. "Tom, you dare return here?" Dumbledore said. Ted froze. "Tom? That senior of his?" The hawk-nosed man laughed then, with a cold, cruel little sound. "I knew you'd suspect, Dumbledore. You trust no one." He wiped at his face, and his chestnut waves and hooked nose came away like a mask. The thing in his hand crinkled like leather, faintly luminous with a hideous magic. Beneath it, the man was not the hawk-nosed professor at all. Bald-skinned, no eyebrows, the nose flattened into two slanted slits, pale as if he'd been dead for days, he bowed in mock civility. "My dear professor, how have you been?" Ted recognized the voice and the yawning chill behind it. He noticed a gem ring on the man's left index finger and a strangely wrought wand in the right hand. Dumbledore's face went hard. "Tom, how many have you harmed?" It took only a cold, sudden logic to make the rest fall into place. The hawk-nosed professor had been murdered. His face had been turned into a magical disguise. The mask was human skin, transformed and enchanted to replicate another's features. However thorough the illusion, those who spent days together would notice small differences that an imperious enchanted mind could account for. The Ilvermorny team had not simply been duped, they had been controlled. The magic siphoning, the contract that bound the teams, the artificial Obscurus, these all fit a monstrous design. Someone had used Imperio to enslave them. Their stolen magic had been consumed to create the Obscurus and to feed other dark experiments. And the man before them, Tom, was no ordinary enemy. The name, the bald white face, the empty slits where a nose should be, Dumbledore's tone and the dread in it made the truth clear. Lord Voldemort had returned. Voldemort had been watching Ted too. He'd noted the boy's power and curiosity, an apprentice with talent, one he had once taught in passing. He had used the tournament to probe and test Ted's potential. The Ilvermorny champion had been useful for a time. Once expendable, he had been destroyed, his life sacrificed. 11 other Ilvermorny students, those who supposedly had not attended the feast, were now unconscious in their rooms. All their magic had been bled away to be used as material for the artificial Obscurus. The contract devised before the tournament had been perverted into a harvesting tool. Voldemort seemed to relish the chaos. Dumbledore had few options. "Tom," he said, "you dare to come back, then do not leave." At once Dumbledore moved. The garden answered him. Flowers, vines, trees, hedges, even the soil and stone walls stir and peel themselves into motion, growing into living shapes, tree folk, vine-writhing monsters, stone giants. For a moment the air smelled of loam and magic, and the defenders pressed forward. Voldemort did not care for subtleties. "I, Lord Voldemort, go where I wish," he said, and then exhaled a torrent of dark green flame. The fire hit the ground and uncoiled into a monstrous three-headed serpentine creature of living flame that lunged at Dumbledore's animate guardians. The two forces met with a crackle and roar that shattered hedges and sent birds up in screaming flocks. Dumbledore, at home on his own turf, could manipulate the very structure of the place, but he held back, wary of wrecking Hogwarts itself. Voldemort held nothing back. His invocations ripped the garden almost to splinters in half a minute's time. It was clear he had no qualms about laying waste to the school if it served his purpose. Ted hesitated, wondering whether to throw himself into the fray to help. Then, Professor Geller stepped forward beside Dumbledore. "This second-generation Dark Lord is formidable," he observed coolly. "How does he compare to you?" Ted asked, more curious than terrified. Geller smiled without humor. "Who can tell without fighting?" Dumbledore had not come alone, and Voldemort's face flickered with surprise. He had expected to be pitted against a single old foe, not two allied wizards whose combined years could outnumber his. Voldemort's earlier arrogance, his failure to check Geller's credentials properly, might have been a mistake. Whatever Geller was, he was no mere accessory. On his move, a spectral blue flame serpent sprang from his conjurations, a wound-stitched, vaporous giant that devoured Voldemort's three-headed dark green snake in a single hungry motion and then reared, coiling to strike at Voldemort himself. The garden filled with the sound of magic clashing, like thunder tuned to the language of wizards. Trees splintered, statues toppled, and the earth shuddered as two ancient enemies and their allies brought battle into the grounds of Hogwarts. 368. I'm fascinated by the novel, and I'm disappointed I started reading Duke Rue's new book, beginning with the section set on Baugius Street. It was so engrossing that before I knew it, it was already midnight. I took the day off today to read. 369. Look what Dumbledore will do. Seeing that it had already become a 2-on-1, Ted couldn't stand by and watch such an obvious unfairness. He moved 2, turning it into 3 against 1. Of course, he wouldn't attack Tom directly. Tom had been his professor for a semester, and the lessons in dark arts and biological modification were not easily forgotten. Besides, with Dumbledore and Grindelwald already clashing, this was not the time to leap in and make things worse. Ted worried about the school. Dumbledore and Voldemort's opening probes had already torn this secluded garden apart. If 3 legendary wizards fought at full strength here, they might devastate the whole castle. Hogwarts had defenses, but once Voldemort was inside, many protections would be useless. They were designed for outside threats, not insider sabotage. Ted's goal was to protect the school and stop Voldemort from blowing it up. If he could take that concern off Dumbledore's shoulders, the others could fight without restraint. Ted hid behind several layers of walls, head never exposed to make himself a harder target. He crouched, palm pressed to the flagstones, and poured magic into the ground. Brilliant blue energy flowed like crystal water through the cracks between tiles, quickly coalescing into a spreading blue light. From his backdoor access to the Chamber of Secrets, he had already activated parts of Hogwarts' defenses and was channeling massive power into the alchemy array he'd set there. The Magic Net Utopia, an exact, data-driven copy of Hogwarts, began to overlay the real school. In other parts of Hogwarts, the virtual and the real overlapped until anomalies were undetectable, but here in the garden, the mirror Hogwarts descended. Ted had used this trick before in the catacombs under Paris, a confusion of virtual and real, something like the Ancient One's mirror dimension in Camartage. In that mirrored space, the 3 could fight to the death without tearing up the actual castle. Ted could enjoy the spectacle while the real Hogwarts stayed intact. When the mirror Hogwarts settled over the garden, the 3 combatants registered it but had no time to spare. Their opponents were dangerous. Grindelwald's modified blue fiendfire snuffed out Voldemort's dark green, 3-headed serpent of flame and reformed into a ghostly blue 3-headed fire snake that lunged and spat at Voldemort. It was a provocation. Grindelwald had always had a taste for theatrical taunts. Using a snake to taunt Voldemort, who used serpents as his own emblem, was a bold slap in the face. Voldemort, however, whose spirit had endured a year of resurrection and scheming, was not cowed. He had spent months as a subordinate to Ryan, and had learned much. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have had the chance to ambush Ryan. Voldemort opened his mouth wide in a horrifying, dislocated way and spat a dense black liquid. The substance writhed in the air like a living thing and expanded into a massive black python that tangled with Grindelwald's blue fire serpent. Blue fire and black liquid hissed and showered the ground, reducing the Mirror Hogwarts to ruins within seconds. Voldemort flicked his wand again. Dozens of skulls made of gray-black mist screamed and surged toward the fiery phoenix Dumbledore had released. Some pierced the phoenix, two even dove for Dumbledore himself before white light from Dumbledore's wand annihilated them. Ted froze. Those white beams looked a lot like a Patronus. Dumbledore borrowing a student's charm? Ted blinked in surprise. Voldemort was well prepared. Even facing two foes, he held his own. Ted watched for 5 minutes from his hiding place and realized Grindelwald seemed half a step weaker than the other two. Perhaps Grindelwald's presence at Hogwarts as a professor wasn't purely self-serving. Maybe he had accepted the post because he couldn't defeat Dumbledore outright, and this was a compromise. It made sense. Grindelwald had been defeated by Dumbledore in 1945 and spent decades in Nurmengard. A wizard's magic is bound up with the state of his mind. Years of defeat and imprisonment would have hollowed his will. Only with the upheavals since Voldemort's fall and the arrival of other magical peoples had some of his hope returned. Still, his power probably had not yet regained its full strength. Dumbledore and Voldemort were different. Dumbledore, with the loosening of the world's ceilings, had already glimpsed higher realms. Voldemort, through his time with Ryan, had acquired unusual knowledge that didn't belong to this world. Both were, right now, stronger than Grindelwald. The duel stretched on for more than 10 minutes, and the spectacle was something else entirely. No mere zap-and-dodge duel. At this level, a single spell could unleash city-sized devastation. Overwhelming infernos, chain explosions, the ground and buildings twisted beyond recognition, summons blotting out the sky. Ted's mirror Hogwarts was already a third demolished. Even a nearby Gryffindor tower lay in ruin. A contest between wizards like this could take days to resolve. They had too much magic, too many recovery methods, and endless counters. The strength gap wasn't large enough for a quick finish. Voldemort began to consider withdrawal. Killing Dumbledore or destroying Hogwarts had not been his original aim. He had come to make a splash, to wound Dumbledore's prestige and announce his return. If he could kill Neville Longbottom in the chaos, that would be ideal. If not, killing a few visiting professors or principals would do. Dumbledore would be besieged by questions. But so far, Voldemort had only killed one Death Eater traitor, Karkaroff, and crippled an African wizard. Dumbledore had a powerful ally who could intervene in the fight, and Voldemort himself had been trapped in the ideal land long enough to learn its weakness. It was time to leave. Voldemort's wand writhed like a living snake, extending a core. He flung it upward, and in an instant the wand became a giant cyan serpent more than a meter across. It uncoiled into the sky and dissolved into a swirl of green magic. The mirror world's dome cracked like blown glass. Voldemort dissolved into black smoke, snatched up his wand, and shot into the heavens, leaving a huge black magic mark hanging in the night before he vanished. Ted wasn't surprised he escaped. With Voldemort's power and knowledge of the ideal land, he had not only entered it, but played its games and helped shape its magic. He could break the mirror world given time. The mirror world wasn't a prison built to contain a wizard of his caliber. Dumbledore and Grindelwald were not shocked either. Unless Voldemort had lost his mind and chosen to fight to the death, escape was inevitable. Keeping such a wizard detained was almost impossible. Besides, he had Horcruxes. Dumbledore didn't pursue him. He watched the black smoke dissipate into the sky in silence. It was worth noting that Voldemort had been masquerading as the hook-nosed professor for over half a year, deeply involved in the school's projects and in grading, especially the ideal land's development. Whether that was good or bad was hard to say. From the start of the tournament, he had been watching Neville and Ted. Neville, needless to say, was a lifelong nemesis. If Voldemort didn't eliminate the boy who lived, his return would never be secure. Neville's mere existence was a challenge to his authority. Voldemort's rule rested on fear and unquestioned obedience. If his authority splintered, the Death Eaters would fracture. Voldemort had spent that time planning a grand return so his reappearance would not diminish the Dark Lord's reputation. When Ted used the dragon binding spell to subdue the mother dragon in the first task, Voldemort took notice. He knew Ted. In Ted's first year, Voldemort had taught him certain things, initially believing he could place a mole inside Hogwarts. But Ted, shrouded by an invisibility cloak, had surprised him badly. At one point, an evil protection spell struck Voldemort's weakened, fragmented soul and made him cry out in pain. It did no lasting physical harm, but it startled him. Voldemort heard rumors of the second year, children dealing with the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, which chilled him. Though without Lucius to clarify what had happened with the Horcrux diary, he could not be certain. In the third year, resurrected by Ryan, he had been treated like a thrall, stripped of Dark Lord dignity, until he managed a desperate, cunning strike that returned him to power. Then this year, the magic net Utopia, which had been a sensation in Paris, reappeared in the Triwizard Tournament. Voldemort tried the ideal land and took part in the virtual magic world. That this marvel had been built by a small group of young wizards stunned him. This project demanded deep knowledge: alchemy, runic magic, transfiguration, legilimency, magical guidance, fields he had not expected children to master. Ted Epiphany, in particular, was a genius, impossible to ignore, a threat even Voldemort resented. Thus, in the final task, Voldemort deployed pawns to cause trouble for Ted. The infiltration had been, fundamentally, reconnaissance of Hogwarts, of Dumbledore, and of promising students. Causing mischief along the way was useful side business. Neville had to be eliminated. Ted was a dangerous wildcard to be removed if he could not be turned. The other champions, Harry, Jerry, Hermione, also drew his attention. Harry for his Order of the Phoenix lineage, Jerry for his mixed blood, Hermione for her Muggle-born background. Voldemort's ideology rejected anything that diluted pure-blood supremacy. Half-bloods and Muggle-born wizards were to be suppressed or exploited. And then there was Draco Malfoy, a Slytherin champion, Lucius's only son, perfect for use as a pawn. If Lucius had been careless with Voldemort's diary, his son could be made to atone. Voldemort withdrew for now, but he already arranged for subsequent pieces to be set into motion. His assigned Death Eaters and their recruited helpers began the next phase of their operation. Back at the school, the banquet erupted. The noise and the sight of the emerald black magic mark in the sky sent students and guests into screams and panic. What was meant to be a memorable farewell dissolved into chaos. Professor McGonagall and the other staff moved quickly to calm everyone and brought the feast to an abrupt close. A group hurried to Dumbledore and found Antonin Karkaroff lying on the floor, his face deathly pale, and an elderly African wizard with a severed arm beside him. Karkaroff was dead. Voldemort's killing curse, if it landed true, would kill even Dumbledore. The African wizard's arm was a blackened stump as if tarred. Whether it would ever be replaced was uncertain, but it looked grim, likely the work of Voldemort as well. "So what happened?" Professor McGonagall asked, voice tight. Dumbledore paused only a heartbeat. "Lord Voldemort," he said. It was Lord Voldemort. Word reached Minister Fudge within 20 minutes. Voldemort had been sighted. He had fought Dumbledore at Hogwarts and left a black magic mark. Karkaroff was dead. A new defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts was missing, and the Ouagadou principal crippled. Fudge feigned amusement at first, and then laughed, a brittle sound. "I knew it," he said. "Nothing's ever that simple. The more they try, the more problems they make. Dumbledore is no exception. Let's see how he answers this one." "Ha!" When a ministry official asked what they should do, Fudge assumed a solemn tone. "We don't know what dark wizard could infiltrate Hogwarts undetected. Certainly not Voldemort. Besides, Voldemort has been dead for over 10 years. Someone is trying to use his name to cover something up. We will investigate." Once Fudge disengaged from denial and donned a show of seriousness, his political instincts kicked in. Those words, noting Voldemort's involvement yet pretending surprise at such a thing, tipped the conversation toward blame, and the finger pointed squarely at Dumbledore. "You are seeking death." Voldemort's voice echoed in Fudge's head, or at least that was how the newly terse headline might have read in the minister's imagination. Privately, Fudge was elated, already scheming how to pin the whole affair squarely on Dumbledore, to weld the blame on so firmly it could never be removed. A foreign headmaster dead, another crippled, and one of his own professors missing with no body recovered, and only Dumbledore had been at the scene. You claim Lord Voldemort did it? Fine. Fudge pictured himself announcing in Tomorrow's Prophet. Where's the proof? How can you show that someone who died more than 10 years ago suddenly appeared at heavily secured Hogwarts and caused a death, an injury, and a disappearance right under your nose? As headmaster of Hogwarts, explain yourself. He laughed out loud at the thought, picked up a pen, and began to sketch a column in which the truth would be made clear. Then his not very bright subordinate burst in without knocking, hair frazzled and eyes wide. Minister, it's bad. I'm fine. I've just been startled by you, Fudge snapped, dropping his pen, ready to scold. The subordinate couldn't get the words out fast enough. Minister, something big has happened, about an hour ago. He told of a scrawny wizard, a Death Eater who had staged his own death to escape and was now reactivated by the Dark Mark, leading a band of clearly unsavory witches and wizards. They sat in a rickety wooden boat with no sails or oars, guided by a ghostly blue lamp hung from the prow. Despite appearing simple and slow, the boat moved over the churning North Sea as if over still ground. After more than 10 minutes, it drifted through a thick white fog to a shadowed island in the distance, Azkaban. Fudge's subordinate hurried on, painting the island's legend. Centuries ago, sailors and ships vanished in that cold stretch of ocean. A dark wizard once took the place for his experiments, and when he died, the Ministry discovered his research. The Dementors. Not mere transformed spirits, these were strange creatures summoned by sacrifices from unknown spaces. After the Ministry was formed, they built a prison on that island and used Dementors as guards. Dementors feed on positive emotions. Prisoners are slowly drained until they lose all hope and belief, their worst memories looping until some go mad and some die. The prison wasn't only for life-term monsters. Smugglers, fraudsters, and financiers served shorter sentences. Those with firm willpower could survive a stint in Azkaban. Dementors were fed only once a day for lesser prisoners. Half a month earlier, a wizard convicted of fraud and assault had been sent there. No one realized he was a planted beacon. Azkaban's location is warded and ringed by impenetrable fog for dozens of nautical miles, but complacency had set in. The beacon had marked the island, and now the skeletal Death Eater and his recruited helpers were landing. Only 2 wizard guards and a few house elves worked on the island. The Dementors were the real jailers. The Death Eaters used a technique Voldemort had developed for resisting the Dementors, a kind of continuous self-hypnosis of will, extreme loyalty acting as a shield. Using that method, the intruders drove the Dementors back. The 2 guards were overwhelmed and killed in 30 seconds. A dozen dark wizards shattered the island's protective charms within 5 minutes. Prisoners were released, including Death Eaters. What did you say? Fudge blurted. I said Azkaban has been invaded. All the prisoners, they've escaped. Impossible. Dementors don't let people break out. Fudge leapt to his feet, hair on end. If a foreign principal had been killed at Hogwarts, Dumbledore would take the flak. But if Azkaban had been breached and dozens of criminals were loose, it would be Fudge himself who would be blamed. His half-finished editorial would have to be rewritten from the ground up. At that very moment, far away on a windswept cliff east of London, an old friend turned foe returned to a ruined seaside house where decades ago a whole Muggle village had been slaughtered. Lord Voldemort drifted over the dark water as a black smoke, feeling, for a flicker, the old thrill he'd had when he first found Slytherin's locket in Borgin and Burke's. He had come to reclaim one of his Horcruxes and re-knit the torn pieces of his soul. He checked instinctively for the Inferi he'd left behind to guard the grotto, over 100 twisted bodies. None remained. Something was wrong. With a flash, he alighted on the rocky shore and peered into the stone basin. A small, delicate locket lay in a pool of potion. Hope hammered in him. He drew a bottle of viscous black liquid from his robes, added a drop to the basin, and cast a spell. The potion steamed into a pale blue mist that took on a ghostly face and howled, but Voldemort waved it away, just the suffering of dying muggles. He smiled and snatched up the locket, then paused. The feel was wrong. This was not the true heirloom from Slytherin. He forced the locket open. Inside was a note. Mr. Shameful Thief, whoever you are, and for such a splendid show, the item has been returned to its rightful owner. Treasure my mercy. If I meet you, I won't be so forgiving." Your esteemed Caractacus Borgin Voldemort swore under his breath. He conjured an image from the locket. A phantom projection showed an older, leering wizard tucking a note inside the locket. Caractacus Borgin of Borgin and Berks. Ansu, who'd kept watch on the shop for 3 days, recording every movement and feeding the data to Ted, had helped produce that image in Ideal Land and inject it into the note. When Ted had delivered the note, he'd been careful not to touch it, performing the spell work without leaving a trace. The culprit had been found. Borgin. Anger flared. Borgin's name was the wrong one to pick. Voldemort crushed the fake locket in his hand and, turning into a black mist, sped off toward Nocturne Alley. Back at Hogwarts, it was late. After goodnight kisses, Ted and Hermione had gone to their dorms. They needed rest. Tomorrow, they would see the exchange students and visiting champions off, and with Fleur and the others gone, Hermione would be able to breathe easier. Ted lay in bed running through the final wave of quest rewards. After a string of successes, the last reward tier had finally reached purple quality. Ding! Quest completed. Triwizard Tournament of 7, Tower of Endless, red. Obtained, 30,000 XP. Card, Trial of 7, purple. Ding! Achievement completed. Triwizard Tournament, I'm the best. Obtained, Legend Value +1, Magic World Reputation +800, British Wizarding Community, Reputation was 2,000. Legend value made people take notice and respect you. Reputation was something Ted had learned to track. His Magic World score read 850 points, thanks to the Paris incident, and his standing in the British Wizarding community was 2,450. The Triwizard Tournament broadcast had been enormous, at its peak when 20,000 wizards were watching live, posting and commenting as if they were part of the spectacle. Ted's fame now extended across roughly a tenth of the wizarding world. It felt like being both a world-class athlete and a movie star. Somebody had also posted a video of Ted singing. It had already reached 300,000 views, and an irreverent meme of pallbearers was spreading like wildfire. Ted laughed softly at his own ridiculousness, breathed, and then opened his new card. The Trial of 7 was a spell card. Usage allows the target to enter a trial lasting 7 stages. Each completed stage grants a massive amount of experience. Uses 3/3. Note, if you fail, subsequent stages cannot be continued. Good luck. A way to earn a huge amount of experience. Ted stared at the card, thinking it through. 3 uses. How much experience would that be? He decided not to rush. He needed rest and to prepare properly before attempting a trial of 7. He wouldn't waste any stages. The next morning, the farewells were soft and tearful. Breakfast was subdued. Younger students with red-rimmed eyes clustered together, whispering, "I'll always remember you. Come visit at Christmas. You're the only one I love. We'll get married after graduation. And write to me." Ted hoped their promises were innocent and earnest. Then a flock of owls descended on the Great Hall, and Ansu landed at Ted's table with a rolled-up newspaper clutched under his wing. The owl dropped it and squawked, "Quick, read, good drama," while pecking at a meat pie. Ted unrolled the Daily Prophet. The front page screamed, "Hogwarts murder case, 1 dead, 1 injured, 1 missing. What is the truth?" A moving photograph showed 4 people carrying the deceased Karkaroff, while nearby a one-armed elderly man was being supported. Crumb slammed the paper down with a clatter, milk splashing. Their dean had died under mysterious circumstances, and now it was all over the paper. Who would stand up for the Durmstrang students? Who would explain this to them? Ted skimmed to page 2. Azkaban suspected of mass escape, Dementors mutiny. Page 3. Nocturne Alley's Borgin and Berks destroyed, owner killed, Borg and family line extinct. Ted blinked. Voldemort had been to the grotto after all. He glanced up as Ansu pecked at the prophet's headline and thought, not for the first time, that the world had suddenly gotten very much larger and a lot more dangerous. 371. Give Lucius a taste of the Cruciatus curse. Clearly, Lord Voldemort had not found his Horcrux at Borgin and Berks. He had resorted to every torture and to legilimency, rifling through the poor shopkeeper's memories, and still found nothing. A cold suspicion was growing in him. Had he been tricked? Could someone of such shabby skill truly have gotten hold of one of his most heavily guarded Horcruxes? Had he been made a fool of? Still, Voldemort could not simply let Mr. Borgin live. He never admitted he was wrong. If he had wronged someone, that wrong had to be answered for. Mr. Borgin's feeble plea, "My lord, please, don't kill me. My father helped you back then," only darkened Voldemort's expression further. Those words dragged him back to the most humiliating period of his life, the gap between the adulation he'd enjoyed at Hogwarts and the bitter reality after graduation. At school, he had been the pride of Slytherin, charismatic, brilliant, feared, and followed. In his 5th year, he had opened the Chamber of Secrets and believed himself descended from Salazar Slytherin. He had even coaxed Helena Ravenclaw's diadem from a gullible housemate. Then the horror of learning his true origins, a half-blood conceived by love potion abused into existence, shattered him. He murdered his relatives and embraced the dark arts. But after graduation, his former followers took their family businesses, their ministry jobs, their respectable positions. He, Tom Marvolo Riddle, ended up, of all things, working as a shop assistant in a second-hand curiosity shop and receiving the scorn of neighbors. That humiliation burned deeper than any grief. The young men who had worshipped him at school now treated him as a failure. Most of the first wave of his followers deserted him because they could. They had seen him at his lowest. Only later, in the second generation of Death Eaters, Lucius Malfoy's peers had Voldemort bound them tightly with marks and fear so they could not flee. He swore he would never be powerless again. He carved his soul into pieces, made Horcruxes, stole treasures. He took a locket, a ring, and traveled the world. He rebuilt himself. Appearances changed. The name changed. The boy from the orphanage vanished. Yet now, a Horcrux had gone missing. He had just recovered the ring when he found the locket missing. Panic flared. What about the others? He had intended 7, but after his revival by Ryan and Barty, he had learned the path of Horcruxes was flawed. Certain necromantic arts from another world could prey on his fractured soul. He had halted further splitting. Nagini, the 6th Horcrux, had never happened to him in this timeline, and he wanted his soul whole again. No, he thought. I must find Lucius at once. Horcruxes came before ceremonies and fleets of loyalists. Voldemort abandoned scheduled meetings with followers on the Anglo-French border and apparated to Malfoy Manor. Late the previous night, Lucius had been suddenly roused by a searing pain like a branding iron across his forearm and a sensation he had long feared, the black mark writhing. Voldemort had returned, and he was close. Lucius had had an ugly premonition ever since the mark had appeared at the Quidditch World Cup last summer, but nothing could prepare him for being found. He had barely a minute. He gathered himself, sealed away memories with a technique learned from Ted, a mind mage, so that even Voldemort's probing legilimency would find nothing. Only Severus Snape rivaled Voldemort in mastery of mind arts. Sir's direct searches could see hesitation and guilt as plain as daylight. A buried memory, however, could be impossible to find until deliberately exhumed. Lucius had done everything that could be done. Then he apparated to a small rise where he could see his manor and waited. Voldemort stood in the moonlight, black-robed, hairless, noseless, his pale pupils small as slits. His ears were slightly pointed. The hand curled around his wand had long black nails like claws. On the lawn, barefoot and still in his dressing gown, Lucius bowed. "Master," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "you have returned." Voldemort's gaze bored into him. "Lucius, my good servant," he said softly, "I remember leaving a diary with you. Where is it now?" Voldemort did not bother with pretense. He could not. 2 of his Horcruxes, the locket and the diary, were gone. For a man who feared death as he did and who had split his soul to cheat it, this was torture. Lucius felt the pressure like a physical knife. He tried to explain. His words were inadequate. Voldemort turned to the simplest demonstration that no excuse could overcome, the Cruciatus. The curse ripped out of him and fell upon Lucius. 3 minutes of Crucio nearly finished the Malfoy. Lucius collapsed, convulsing and whimpering, his body twisting as if trying to escape itself. Even after the spell ceased, he remained sprawled on the grass, twitching like a fish on a shore. Voldemort watched him, expression tight, watching the pain, savoring it, yet oddly burdened by it, as if the torment troubled him almost as much as it did Lucius. Time and calculation kept Voldemort from killing him outright. He had a new measure of restraint. He wore the gaunt ring, a piece of his soul restored, and he knew murder was not always the wisest choice. Lucius, for all his slipperiness, still had resources, money, and influence. The Malfoys were useful. Better to prolong suffering and extract answers when needed. So the Dark Lord withdrew, promising himself further torment yet to come. By morning, the newspapers were full of the names of the convicts who had escaped from Azkaban, names that made Neville and Harry see red. Many of those names were tied to the murders of their parents. Harry vowed in private that if he ever crossed paths with any of them, they would have no second chance. Blood debts, he thought, must be paid in blood. Ted set the paper down and considered. Voldemort was back, resurrected, in possession of the ring Horcrux, and with a cohort of loyalists rescued. He was also smarter, careful, not making a grand, undeniable appearance. That made the truth easy for the public to deny. People preferred avoidance. After so many years with Voldemort dead and their lives cautious around his name, they were willing to believe any denial. Minister Fudge, predictably, was denying Voldemort's return, hinting that it was Dumbledore making excuses. Fudge's words were a small, poisonous political maneuver: deny the return, smear Dumbledore, and control panic. Ted's concern lay elsewhere. Where had Professor Gellert gone after the duel at Hogwarts? The original Dark Lord had vanished after that confrontation. Had he completed his work at the school? Ted didn't pry too deeply. Someone taller would carry the weight if the sky fell. As long as Dumbledore, the tallest figure at the moment, remained standing, other problems receded. That afternoon, Ted was summoned to the headmaster's office. Dumbledore received him in the same room, with the same calm, but there was a gravity behind his eyes now. "It should have ended cleanly," Dumbledore said, "but it did not." "It should have," Ted agreed. "We must take responsibility." "You needn't blame yourself too much," Dumbledore replied, then proceeded to confide more than he usually would. The old wizard spoke of international reactions, of the Wizengamot and Confederation inquiries, and of attempts to tie blame for recent events to Dumbledore himself. He warned Ted to be wary of certain righteous illusions. "Gellert," he said, "do not be fooled by any claim of the greater good." Then Dumbledore dropped a revelation that made Ted sit up. The wand Voldemort now wielded was not a mere replacement. It was the snake wand, Salazar Slytherin's wand, which had been taken to North America centuries ago and transformed around a healing asp tree near a school founded by a witch and her muggle husband. That school was Ilvermorny. Voldemort had intercepted and captured Ilvermorny's emissaries and seized their snake tree. In short, he now held the wand of his ancestor. No wonder the Dark Lord had held his own earlier against Dumbledore. Dumbledore possessed the Elder Wand. Voldemort now wielded the Snake Wand. It was a contest between potent instruments and the wizard who carried them. Ilvermorny had only been founded relatively recently. Though much of it was modeled after Hogwarts, it lacked the deep, layered heritage of the British school. For a long time, there had been no truly powerful figures anchoring wizarding life in North America. In the early days, wizards faced grim circumstances. The Magical Congress of the United States strictly forbade much contact with nomads, and there were purifier families, traitorous wizards who made it their business to hunt other wizards. Those were miserable years. All that changed over time, but when Lord Voldemort first rose to power, he simply didn't look across the ocean. His focus was narrow. He obsessed over Britain and, at most, glanced at nearby France and Germany. He never really grasped the breadth of the rest of the world. He wasn't like Grindelwald. Grindelwald came from an old pure-blood family, was expelled from Durmstrang for delving into dangerously dark magics, and had a foundation so deep that even Durmstrang, an institution that tolerated the dark arts, couldn't stomach him. Grindelwald's ambitions were global and world-class, and the International Confederation of Wizards united most wizarding nations against him. Voldemort's story was different. He came from a Muggle orphanage and had serious psychological defects. He spent 10 years traveling the darker corners of the world, rubbing elbows with the most wicked dark wizards and learning the most poisonous of arts. After a decade of struggle, he still couldn't leave Britain, largely because Dumbledore was keeping him tied down. He had little reason to pay attention to a small school in the United States. At the time, the US was only beginning to replace Britain as a global power. A native Briton like Voldemort had little cause to care. That changed after his resurrection. The Paris incident the previous summer had opened Voldemort's eyes to the wizarding forces of all Europe and by extension to the rest of the world. Under the International Confederation's call, ministries across the globe had sent aid, revealing how many powers there were beyond Britain. If Britain wasn't an immediate place to make trouble, why not establish a base somewhere far away? The United States presented an attractive target, across an ocean, lacking a dominant master and economically powerful. He decided to go. Like everything else, when he couldn't act openly, he did it badly. Unable to use official channels, he took a ship. He wasn't familiar with sea travel. Though he used Imperio on the captain, he still got on the wrong vessel and ended up in Australia. He reportedly stood on the deck, bewildered, when kangaroos were the first strange things he saw. Eventually, he made it to North America, found the wizarding gathering places, and infiltrated Ilvermorny. At first, he imagined himself stepping in as principal. Then he discovered a snake staff, something the Slytherin wand had become. For Voldemort, that was a sign from fate. How could he have found an ancestor's wand by chance? He took it as confirmation that destiny favored him. He abandoned the idea of being principal and set about pulling up the tree that hid the staff. When word of the Triwizard Tournament reached him, Ilvermorny was to send a representative. He used Imperio on the school's principal, murdered the hawk-nosed professor guarding the staff, seized the snake staff, and sent Ilvermorny's misfit team to Hogwarts. The staff itself was remarkable. An ancient Slytherin relic, a purple-quality item used by a Slytherin performer 1,000 years ago. Even without a master, it could use its own magic to become, at need, a living to preserve itself. Voldemort, who had been searching fruitlessly for the Elder Wand, found a weapon far more suited to him. Imagine his glee, disguised at Hogwarts, voice low and courteous under Dumbledore's nose, slipping into reviews and staging challenges again and again. He must have felt like laughing at every public display. That gloating, of course, had consequences. Some of that happiness would be paid for by others, and in this case, a great deal of it landed on Ted. The Triwizard Tournament, which should have been a grand event, was ruined by Voldemort's meddling and murder. With Ilvermorny's principal dead, Durmstrang's contingent left sullen and threatening, rugged young men in furs, faces unshaven, giving the impression of danger. The Ouagadougou students were no better off. Their principal had lost an arm. Exchange students departed more mournful than usual, hugging friends and lovers and leaving with reddened eyes. Fleur embraced a mermaid student, Ellie, then Hermione. "Hermione, I won't forget you. You are the most excellent witch," she cooed. Hermione, both flattered and affronted, bristled. "I'm not just going to hand Ted over to you," Fleur added, smiling mischievously. Hermione straightened instantly, hands on hips, whispering through clenched teeth, "Come and try. You've got no chance." It was a little vain. Fleur was impressive, and Hermione knew it, but pride mattered in front of friends. Fleur, teasing, hugged Ted and murmured in his ear, "Come to Beauxbatons when you have time. You're welcome." Hermione fumed, panting with anger. Ted glanced sideways and couldn't help but smile. His girl had matured. It was partly the clothes which had loosened to hide the changes. After the representative teams left, Hogwarts felt emptied and exhausted, the echo after a wild celebration. The younger students quieted down and returned to classes, counting the days until the holiday. Because of the Triwizard Tournament, the inter-house Quidditch season and the final exams were canceled. Without exams, everyone relaxed. A week later, on Friday, the holiday began. Ted had planned to use the break to explore philosophical questions with Hermione, secretly, of course. Hermione was looking forward to it, and she also planned to stay close to Ted to keep an eye on Fleur. On the morning they were meant to leave, Fawkes the Phoenix brought Ted a letter from Dumbledore asking him to bring his protégés to a meeting that afternoon. Ted's first reaction was to go alone. What business had children at such a meeting? But he knew Dumbledore would never permit it. Neville had been cultivated as the school's hope for so long. Dumbledore wouldn't let him sit idly by. Neville also had more reason than most to be involved. That fragment of soul on his forehead tethered him to the fight. And the same was true for Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the others. There was nowhere safe to hide once the whole wizarding community was shaken. With Ted and Neville present, they were already junior members of the Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore, Ted thought, I overestimate your bottom line. On the Hogwarts Express, he told the kids. They were electrified. They had already been fighting or resisting Voldemort in small ways since their first year. To them, the news of his return was undeniable. Malfoy was pale. Raised by a father who knew of the Dark Lord's terror, he swallowed his fear and forced himself forward. Ted briefly considered telling Jerry to withdraw and stay out of it, but he didn't. Jerry wouldn't abandon his friends. Leaving would be an insult to all they had fought for. If anything happened, Jerry wouldn't have an easy time either. I must remind you, Ted said, looking at them seriously, we're allowed to attend and recognized as part of this cause, but we're not the main force. You may meet a few Death Eaters and handle some skirmishes, but don't underestimate how dangerous this is. Understood, Ron blurted. Safety first, Jerry answered. Ted scratched his head. How had his students adopted prudence as instinct? He hadn't lectured them into caution. They had learned by example. There were no rash, suicidal impulses among them. Even Harry and Neville grasped when they should run. Prudence prevented catastrophe. That afternoon, after disguising themselves and circling the meeting place under magical cover, they reached the Order's secret base through a portkey in an alley off South London. In the original story, the Order used the Black ancestral home, heavily warded and convenient as a safe house. Now, however, Sirius himself had the comforts of a settled life. His wife had just given birth to a chubby son, and some of the family's darker ornaments had been put away to avoid frightening the child. So for this meeting, the Order used another, anonymous safe house. The Order had more than enough of them. Dumbledore could have produced 10 such sanctuaries at once. When Ted and his companions arrived, many faces were already there. Sirius, the Weasleys, Lupin, Snape, McGonagall, Hagrid. Others, Mad-Eye Moody, Auror Captain Kingsley Shacklebolt, Daedalus Diggle, Elphias Doge, Mundungus Fletcher, stood among them. Mundungus, who occasionally turned up in Hogsmeade trading in dubious goods, was the sort of useful scoundrel Dumbledore employed now and then. In the original books, he had even stolen Slytherin's locket to sell, forcing the Golden Trio to risk going to the Ministry to retrieve it. Dumbledore used what was useful, regardless of its shape. The children greeted familiar faces with a rush of pride and nervousness. Sirius and Snape, however, watched them with clenched resentment. They understood how unavoidable this was, but to see the next generation drawn in stung. Why had they fought, if not to give their children a life without war? And yet, here were the children being pulled into another conflict. Dumbledore arrived late with an apparition pop. He took in the room's solemn atmosphere and the undercurrent of bitterness, especially in Snape's stare. Snape had betrayed for reasons only he knew, and though he failed to save Lily, now her daughter would be brought into the fray. Dumbledore understood their discomfort and was grave as he began. I should be glad to see you all, he said softly, but I am not. If we were gathered under other circumstances, I would be joyous. Instead, I am saddened to see you here like this. Tom Riddle is not wholly dead. He has returned. War will break out soon. War is cruel. Some of us may not survive. The initiative at this time is not on our side. He will not give up. We must prepare. For 10 years, the Order of the Phoenix had been scattered. Now it was reunited. Dumbledore shared what he had discovered in that time. He reminded them how, in Ted's first year, the young Tom had come to Hogwarts via Professor Quirrell's back, and how Dumbledore had been powerless to stop him. It wasn't until the second year, when Ted found a diary destroyed by a basilisk's fang, that they understood more. That diary had been a Horcrux, a vessel in which Tom had hidden a piece of his soul. Dumbledore went on to explain the nature of Cruxes and the necessity of destroying them all. He told them that the idea had a long, dark history. Folk stories like that of Koshkai the Deathless, who hid his soul in a needle inside an egg, inside a duck, inside a hare, inside an iron chest, inside an oak on a distant island. That nesting of protections was precisely the grim idea behind Tom's Horcruxes. By splitting his soul and hiding pieces, he could return again and again unless every fragment was found and destroyed. "We must find all the Horcruxes and destroy them," Dumbledore said. "Otherwise, Tom will keep coming back." The room held its breath. The war, it seemed, was beginning anew, and everyone present understood the work ahead: to prepare, to search, and to be ready to pay whatever price was necessary to end this threat once and for all. 373. The Third Celestial Conjunction. The Order of the Phoenix wasn't strictly hierarchical. It had a relaxed, easygoing atmosphere. Even when Dumbledore's tone turned a little solemn, everyone soon lightened up. There were too many hardships in this world. This group had grown used to them. Facing Lord Voldemort was something they had done before. They treated the enemy with strategic seriousness but tactical disdain. These veteran magical warriors already knew how to hold themselves. Under Sirius and Lupin's teasing, everyone laughed and relaxed. The food arrived quickly, and they ate while chatting. "Lord Voldemort, or whatever, let's eat first," Ted joked. And for the moment, everyone was in good spirits. Everyone except Snape, perpetually moody and never given to smiles. He excused himself before the meal and left. Frankly, after Snape went, the atmosphere seemed even more cheerful. Hagrid stroked his huge, neatly combed beard, sighed, and said, "I never thought I'd be more handsome than the school heartthrob back in the day." When Tom had been at school, it wasn't an exaggeration to say he'd been adored by everyone. He had the golden-haired charisma of a classic favorite. Hagrid's situation back then was the opposite. He'd been expelled in his 3rd year, had no close friends, and could only spend his days with magical creatures. He'd been an awkward, loud, clumsy oaf who didn't know his own strength, didn't understand many social graces. His father had been a frightening man who dared to court a female giant and had succeeded in fathering Hagrid. Though Hagrid's father cared for him, he died around the time Hagrid started school. It was the story of a child without a home, hated, framed, his wand broken, sent away. Hagrid became a gamekeeper. Now he had completely changed. He was Dumbledore's trusted friend, professor of care of magical creatures at Hogwarts, respected by students, publishing in professional journals, and even courting Madame Maxime, headmistress of Beauxbatons. Tom, the senior who had framed him, had fallen in the meantime, transformed into something non-human, his senses diminished. Fortune turns in strange ways. Life is full of vicissitudes. Of course, it helps to meet the right people. Malfoy felt something of that now. "Fight Lord Voldemort? Are you serious? Us?" Malfoy's face was pale. His fear of Voldemort, rooted in his father's actions, went deeper than most. Harry kept holding his hand under the table. Without the meeting, they might have spent more time together over the holidays, hiding from Sirius. Ted, though outwardly joking, felt pressure inside. The previous years had been easier because Lord Voldemort hadn't yet made his major moves. But in the original timeline, by the end of the 4th year, Voldemort had already been resurrected, and the mood had darkened. After his return, the series lost its bright, childlike tone and slid toward the grimness of old dark fairy tales. In the canon, it began to change with Cedric's death. This time, Ted thought he'd been luckier. He should not be involved. This time, Karkaroff had died. Ted worried about his companions. He needed a way to strengthen them. The situation was worse now. Voldemort had resurrected early, gained some magic that didn't belong to this world, and acquired the snake staff. That made him much stronger than in the original story. Worse, he had a mind for strategy now. He was using a two-pronged approach, moving openly while secretly rescuing loyal Death Eaters. If he made enough noise about thriving, the peripheral Death Eaters who had escaped the purge would rally to him. He could return to the terrifying power he'd once wielded over the British wizarding community. Most people still don't believe Lord Voldemort has returned. "That's what Dumbledore says," Harry complained. Hermione speared a piece of steak and put it on Ted's plate. "They're not like us. We knew from the start that Voldemort wasn't gone." Ted, cutting his steak, replied, "It's normal for people to disbelieve. Most folks want to believe what's comforting. They're reluctant to face awful truths. The instinct to seek advantage and avoid harm runs deep." Hermione looked satisfied and took the steak. Ron, chewing a meat pie, mumbled, "Can Voldemort's Horcruxes really make him immortal?" Jerry and Malfoy both pricked up their ears. Who wouldn't want to live forever? Ted glanced at his friends and the adults watching them from the edges, then said, "Last summer I spent 2 months studying alchemy with Nicholas Flamel. He and his wife died peacefully at the end of it." "He told me once that only a fool believes death is the worst thing," Ted continued. "Existence has meaning, but eternal existence is meaningless. Life is a process, to live and to pass away. When you fear death, remember this: death can be a gift. What you should fear is eternal life." Everyone grew thoughtful. Meanwhile, Dumbledore had already begun assembling forces to oppose Voldemort and the Death Eaters. Their first task was to confirm how many Horcruxes Voldemort had made, an investigation that would need to dig decades back to his student days. Who was the first person he killed? Moaning Myrtle. Did he learn about Horcruxes from someone in his house? This pointed to Horace Slughorn, Slytherin's head at the time, as a crucial lead. As Dumbledore prepared, the International Confederation of Wizards quietly contacted allies. This was no longer merely a British civil war. Voldemort had extended his influence to Ilvermorny in North America. The British Ministry of Magic, however, made a show of denial. The pattern was familiar. "Minister, Voldemort has returned." Fudge. "Calm down. Phase 1, claim nothing's happened. Phase 2, say something might have happened but do nothing. Phase 3, suggest we should act, but then say there's nothing to be done. Phase 4, the time to act has passed. Always play for stability." The Daily Prophet printed anything except mention of the Dark Lord. Even the Azkaban breakout was pushed to the back pages. Why did Fudge so vehemently deny Voldemort's return? 2 words: stability. Admitting Voldemort was back would mean admitting they had to fight him, and would Fudge risk leading the Ministry into that? He wouldn't. He was already cringing at his re-election prospects. Why risk everything? The Order's supporters were badly placed. They were underpowered militarily, and if they lost the battle for public opinion, they would have nobody. They could be labeled troublemakers, alarmists, fearmongers. If you don't control the narrative, the enemy will, and Voldemort could use public opinion and the Ministry to turn people against the Order. A just cause gathers support. An unjust one finds none. If black becomes white and white turns black, it will be disastrous. They had to unite every force they could. Relying on the Daily Prophet was impossible now. Fudge had succeeded in bringing the paper under his control. According to what Ted had learned in dreams from Rita Skeeter, the director and editor-in-chief were Fudge's people. Even a short, stout, pink-clad woman supervised every article and photo. Fudge had grasped the levers of influence. But they couldn't give up. Ted still had the most powerful propaganda tool, Magic Net Utopia. Even Dumbledore and Voldemort together couldn't take that from him. The Magic Net had been built across much of Europe. Except in remote regions where signal towers and ley lines weren't yet laid, people could log into Utopia. Even Egypt had an internet now. But the net alone wasn't enough. Older, conservative wizards still trusted print. Ted couldn't openly confront Fudge. Dumbledore would scold him. He was a supporter, not a frontline agitator. So he needed disguises and other means to spread truth. There was one print backup, the Quibbler. While the Prophet argued the absurdity of Voldemort's return, the Quibbler published long pieces insisting he had come back and even printed supposed insider information. If it hadn't matched things Ted already knew, he might have believed the Quibbler had exclusive sources. Xenophilius Lovegood genuinely thought Voldemort had returned and had used his magazine to press the point. The Quibbler could be the print front for the counter-narrative. The problem was obvious. The Quibbler's style was too eccentric, tabloid, outsider, so few took it seriously. It was the wizarding equivalent of those conspiracy outlets claiming everything from faked moon landings to secret lizard people governments. It would be hard to make most people trust it. Ted thought of other channels, radio perhaps, but before he could even retrofit the magic radio, something far stranger occurred. The day after the Order meeting, while Ted was tinkering with a magic radio, a mountain peak suddenly appeared in Switzerland, about 1,200 meters high, rising alone at the end of a range, as if born out of morning fog. That day nothing much happened, but locals who knew the terrain noticed the peak the next morning. Had Yugong been at work in Switzerland? A group of adventurous young men went to explore and found a colony of 50 or 60 half-orcs. Gray-white, rock-like skin, ugly and squat but ferocious. They had crude metallurgy and construction skills and had tamed terrifying wargs. The 6 explorers were slaughtered, and a nearby town was attacked hours later. Fortunately, the local sheriff, a veteran with a drawer full of medals, had retained the instincts of a commander. With his family's armory and his leadership, the town's residents repelled the first wave. But the mountain held many caves and a larger force. Some half-orcs were taller, wearing crude armor and wielding huge cleavers. Small arms fire only caused them to flinch before they charged on. As the residents evacuated, some chased by half-orcs mounted on bitter-looking giant wargs, archers shot and killed several townspeople. Through binoculars, the sheriff saw creatures over 3 meters tall. Hours later, the Swiss Reserve Army arrived. Modern firepower, machine guns and portable rocket launchers pushed the half-orcs back, but the soldiers refused to pursue them into the caves. This mountain wasn't on any map. Such phenomena weren't limited to Switzerland. Between Spain and Portugal, a new, huge river appeared overnight, turning low-lying lands into reservoirs and bringing enormous pythons and anacondas 15 to 20 meters long. Between Poland and Lithuania, a 10-kilometer rift valley opened, home to unfamiliar giant raptors. In short, terrains and creatures that didn't belong to this world had begun to intrude. Incomplete global statistics already recorded over 20 such occurrences, big and small. The International Confederation of Wizards concluded it was very likely that the third large-scale celestial conjunction was beginning. The third heavenly star confluence had begun, or rather, it had never really stopped. It came like a tide. The change was usually imperceptible until a wave broke and everything surged. The arrival of Ryan from another world, the appearance of the blazing lands, the growing number of elemental creatures, and the occasional headlines about half-orcs and goblins had all been part of that tide. But now the confluence was different. Abnormal terrain was erupting over multiple regions worldwide, with obvious, large-scale effects. It was getting impossible to hide. The magic world and the muggle world were forced into contact, scrambling to minimize the damage. In Switzerland, thousands of half-orcs and ogres were flushed out of a mountain cave only after several countries' ministries of magic sent powerful wizards to work alongside soldiers with firearms and cannons. In Spain and Portugal, a great river was temporarily sealed off under the pretense of an underground water surge, while wizards and troops quietly slaughtered 10-meter-long giant pythons. A huge rift valley was blamed on an earthquake after the local military detonated explosives to render the area passable. In short, they lied, obfuscated, and hid the truth wherever they could. In most places, most of the time, most people were not entitled to know what was really happening. There were smaller incidents in England, wild zones gaining new land, odd creatures appearing, a new little lake showing up near London. The Ministry of Magic handled those matters when necessary, but they were stretched thin. Ted wondered what triggered this particular wave of the Heavenly Star confluence. The first had followed the end of the great Dumbledore-Grindelwald battle. The second coincided with Voldemort's apparent death by his own curse. Was this third wave tied to Voldemort's resurrection, or to the 2 children from other timelines who had entered the Triwizard Tournament? No one had a satisfactory answer, so Ted shelved the question for later. Voldemort was the immediate concern. So Ted stuck to the plan, finished the magic radio. He went out to Ironhammer Fortress, enlisted some gnomes, and dove into magic-guided technology. With gnome craftsmanship and Ted's designs, they had a modular structural prototype in under 3 days. Modules could be added or removed to change functionality. Ideal Land, Ted's virtual simulation environment, made development orders of magnitude faster. He could test designs there without expending real resources. Ideal Land wasn't a game, at least not for professionals. It was a sandbox for experimenting with magic, potions, runes, and magic-guided tech, where you didn't have to worry about blowing yourself up. With the modular framework complete, Ted set the alchemy array running, fed in the ingredients, and a batch of semi-finished magic radios poured out. Assemble, enchant, stamp the authentication sigils. Done. He built 100 units and handed them to friends and classmates for trials that very evening. At 6 on the dot on June 26th, Hermione Granger stood in the hallway of her London home, listening for the moment. Dad, Mum, I'm going back to my room. Oh, honey, your favorite show is about to start, her mother said. Mom, I have a new favorite now, Hermione answered, rushing back to her bedroom. She took out the little radio, fed it a pulse of magic, and spoke the secret code. This woman is not good silver. It had to be said in a Tianjin accent for the authentication to work, an idiosyncratic phrase chosen to avoid interception. Anyone who didn't know the code would only access ordinary channels. When Hermione spoke it, the radio opened to Ted's anti-Voldemort channel. Hello, hello, can you hear me? The time is 6 p.m., June 26th. This is Wang Nima, host of the anti-Voldemort channel, broadcasting to you, the voice announced. This channel exists to cope with the coming darkness. We'll share information, spread knowledge, and help each other through the crisis. Then music. Next, enjoy a new song, Unstoppable. A metallic, soaring voice filled the room and 100 other households at once. I'll smile. I know what it takes to fool this town. I'll do it till the sun goes down and all through the nighttime. Someone in the channel joked that to sing that song properly, you had to dye half your hair white. The effect was immediate. Listeners felt a rush of energy. Mrs. Granger peeped in at the door, and after the song ended, exclaimed, half delighted, half bewildered. Wow, how did I never know there was a radio station like this? That was wonderful. Hermione beamed with pride. All across the network, many people listened. Friends, classmates, even some foreigners. Fleur Delacour was among the listeners. No, Ted hadn't secretly visited Paris. Ansu had transported 10 radios to the city of romance to spread a spark of resistance in the old revolutionary districts. The world did not slow down. In the past 2 days alone, more landmasses had appeared. Islands had rose from the sea. Some unlucky regions found new rift valleys cutting roads in two, or suddenly acquiring stretches of desert. The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes spun explanations and excuses, absurd cover stories issued in bulk, but the public grew harder to fool. Muggles took to the streets. In the magic world, fear prompted hoarding and frantic construction of safe houses. Ted held a copy of the Daily Prophet and smiled helplessly. Even near London, that little lake had become an attraction. A Muggle boy claimed a fairy lived in it and was so thrilled his pants came off. Police suspected hallucinogenic mushrooms and were doing what they could, but that only made curious thrill-seekers bolder. If the confluence continued, the International Statute of Secrecy might be rendered obsolete. How long could you plausibly hide mountains appearing in city centers? Ted imagined absurd headlines: Old Lady from Buckingham Palace leaves London, Unspeakable Muggle Woman approaches the North, Despicable Magic Thief enters Scotland, Her Majesty the Queen occupies Hogsmeade, Her Majesty Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor arrives at Hogwarts. Filch, Hogwarts can't fit so many people. The absurdity made him laugh, but the underlying problem was serious. No one could remain indifferent. Even the alchemy associations, mostly clubs of old men, held continuous meetings. Death Eaters, who many assumed had scattered, had in fact reassembled, far to the north, in Norway. It was a cunning choice. Norway sat just out of the core political orbit of England, France, or Germany. It was remote enough to be overlooked. The turmoil in Eastern Europe and the fallout from the polar bear's collapse left pockets of instability, perfect refuge. Voldemort and the faithful he'd rescued established themselves there, using local Gringotts branches to launder and withdraw funds remotely, expanding influence. In a month, they'd recruited 30 or 40 peripheral members, wizards uniting for protection and warmth, who didn't know they were signing up with the Revival Society, Voldemort's new cover organization. With celestial anomalies appearing everywhere, the situation grew even more chaotic. Under Voldemort's instruction, some Death Eaters posed as noble purebloods and slipped into local wizard institutions, using money and deception to gain positions of influence. If granted time, they might even vie for political office. Who knew whether they'd attempt to secure the Norwegian Minister of Magic slot within a few months? Voldemort had grown in ways few imagined, and Ryan had been a prime catalyst. Other stranger groups were moving too. Astrologers, self-described stargazers and seers, declared through Greek newspapers that a great era was coming and no one could escape it. In the United States, beyond the Magical Congress, civilian groupings like the Witch Gathering stirred. Witches born with latent supernatural powers awoke and proved effective in combat. Prophetic witches predicted the world's end, sky-swallowing monsters, nuclear-scale explosions, utter ruin. Even China had activity. News trickled in of a Lama temple in Shangri-La searching for a savior child. End June was a season of rumors and panic. Diagon Alley's usual composure was gone. Steely-faced witches and wizards hurried through the streets. The ideal land forum was a refuge. Ted moderated tirelessly, blocking sensationalist doomsday posts, warning people away from fake news and posting measured updates to calm the frightened. One morning, a dour, oversized black owl thudded into Ted's yard, clutching a mirror in its talons. "Are you delivering a message?" Ted asked. The owl nodded impatiently and tapped the mirror with a leg, signaling him to sign. Ted donned dragonhide gloves, took the mirror, and the bird launched for the next delivery. Probably late deliveries docked its pay. The mirror was a two-way communicator. When Ted tapped it, a familiar face resolved out of the glass. "Hello, Ted. How are you?" said Professor Gellert Grindelwald himself, smiling into the mirror. Ted wasn't surprised. Grindelwald's followers would not idle while others scrambled. Age meant little for wizards who survived. Influence, wealth, and experience counted for a lot, and Grindelwald, when he spoke, had a way of making the future sound inevitable. Dumbledore's old warning, "Don't be swayed by Geller's allure," echoed in Ted's head. Grindelwald continued, mild and charismatic. "I suppose you anticipated seeing me? Did Albus warn you about my allure?" Ted nodded. There was no point pretending ignorance. If anyone was suspicious of the other, it was mutual. "I know you're wary," Grindelwald said. "You ought to be, but I have seen the future." Grindelwald was a prophet of sorts. He could peer into possible futures. His visions weren't absolute destiny. They were probabilities, windows into what might come. What he claimed to have seen now was grim, a future in which all wizards had to take up their wands and fight. Ted could understand the appeal of Grindelwald's rhetoric. There was always that core demand, fairness. Work and reward must align. People fed up with injustice were easy to stir. Grindelwald's pitch had always been grand. Rebuild the world for wizards, end exploitation, establish order. He had charisma and a sweeping vision that drew believers. But his plan was impatient and brutal. He wanted to reshape society quickly, to seize power rather than build support slowly. He'd tried to rule by force in the past. He believed in dominating muggles rather than building productive, resilient wizard institutions. Ted thought that was a dead end. Ruling billions of muggles with only a few million wizards was unrealistic in the long term. Modern technology, nukes, satellites, global infrastructure, was not something a small cabal could simply overwrite. A better approach, Ted believed, was infiltration. Quietly gain control of power structures, influence key decision-makers, and let time and bureaucracy do the rest. Build productivity, win legitimacy, only the reckless rushed for crowns. Grindelwald listened, amused rather than persuaded. He'd learned and changed too. His return to the world hadn't simply been a rehash of old plans. Speaking to Ted was a soft probe, a tentative opening. He appeared not as an immediate conqueror, but as someone testing the waters. He'd grown more patient in some ways, more calculating in others. Ted felt the old thrill of danger. He also felt obligation. Grindelwald's sight of a world where wizards were forced to fight made him uneasy. The path forward was uncertain, the choices fraught, and the confluence only made everything harder. The mirror glittered. Grindelwald's smile remained, inscrutable. The conversation was far from over. 375. Take a day off. Yesterday, my writing went smoothly, and I planned to postpone my last day off this month until after the 20th. But today, I'm feeling low. I've been writing too late into the night, and starting a new volume has scattered my thoughts. Laziness crept in. This spell of idleness, combined with feeling unwell, made the day both dull and painful. During the day, my mom started pressuring me about marriage again. I'm already in my 30s. How much longer am I supposed to drag this out? Honestly, I plan to stay single for life. I can't say that aloud, though. If I did, she'd get angry and we'd part on bad terms. I also spoke with relatives on the phone about my health. Ever since my second COVID infection, my body has felt weak, and because of that weakness, I haven't exercised in a long time. In fact, I haven't really left the house for almost 2 months. At most, I'll go to the nearby market or supermarket for groceries. I forced myself to walk by the river once, but I was back in 5 minutes. I just didn't want to move. I have no motivation for anything. I stay up late and don't wake until 9 or 10 in the morning. I mess around until it's already afternoon. Often I only eat one meal a day. I want to pull myself together, but it feels hard. My relatives suggested I take some medicine to replenish my chi and blood. My body really isn't doing well. When I stretch my neck, it hurts so much that I can only sleep on my side. I don't dare turn over. It took several days to get a little better. I have no spirit, no energy, and I don't even feel like eating. Sigh, how did I end up like this? July 1st. Ding, talent, other knowledge activated. Discovered Broken Konoha Village Sealing Scroll. The Broken Konoha Village Sealing Scroll, purple, recorded various forbidden techniques invented by Konoha's greatest shinobi across generations. Techniques too difficult, too dangerous, or demanding too great a price. For some reason, the massive scroll had been damaged. Only fragments remained. Redeem cost, 1999 experience points. Holy cow. Purple quality. Ted was stunned that even a partial scroll could be that rare. He immediately redeemed it and felt the experience drain away. Instead of a stream of text, a giant paper scroll, over a meter long, appeared in his mind. It looked as if it had survived a war, scorched, punctured, a large chunk missing from the bottom, 2 sword slashes across it, 3 kunai embedded in the paper. Whoever had used this scroll had been through hell. Ted forced the damaged parchment open, the burn marks repeated across the roll, the holes and missing sections obscuring many passages. To his surprise, he could somehow read the old script. Good thing he'd purchased the knowledge. The system allowed comprehension. The bad news was the content was badly incomplete. He sifted through what remained and, using his familiarity with the Naruto world, identified the fragments. Multiple shadow clone jutsu, only the opening lines survived. Since it was listed first, it was the most damaged. He couldn't possibly reconstruct it from that. Several sealing jutsu were present, or at least things that looked like sealing techniques. 2 of them were recognizable. Reaper Death Seal, Shikifujin. Only the first third existed. 4 Symbols Seal, the latter half remained. If he were lucky, perhaps those 2 fragments could be combined. Otherwise, he'd have to improvise. There was a heavy concentration of water release techniques. No surprise, since Tobirama Senju, the second Hokage, had invented many sealing arts and was famed for water release. A few high-level water techniques were intact: explosive water colliding wave, water severing wave, and water dragon biting explosion. A handful were incomplete: hardened vortex water blade, water clone great explosion technique, and a simplified water dragon bullet. Water release wasn't a problem. Ted could grasp the principles and, with his ability to alter magical attributes, adapt or rebuild them easily. More alarmingly useful, the scroll contained fragments of 2 notorious forbidden jutsu. A quarter version of Impure World Reincarnation, Edo Tensei, remained. The parts on collecting body tissue and sacrificing a human to anchor the summoned soul survived, but the rest was gone. Even that partial knowledge was priceless. In this world, once someone died, their soul normally went to the afterlife and could not be retrieved. If he could figure out how to call a soul back and then create or bind a body, Ted had plenty of methods: human transmutation, puppet curses, magical cybernetic bodies, to exploit it. A half version of Flying Thunder God was also present. Steps to create spatial positioning marks and trigger teleportation existed, but the critical, nuanced parts were missing. That was less worrying here. The magic world already provided full explanations of spatial manipulation. Apparition, port keys, teleportation circles, even Ted's own flash and blink techniques, so he could fill the gaps. The last fragment made Ted stare. This one couldn't be Tobirama's. The concept and method were completely different. It was Orochimaru's work, an early form of the cursed seal. Likely primitive, something like the seal placed on Anko Mitarashi, not yet the version later used on Sasuke, but it was enough. Ted's biological alchemy instincts leapt. The cursed seal was a godsend for species modification. No wonder the system rated the scroll purple. Water release aside, the real value lay in the partial Edo Tensei, the sealing arts, and the early cursed seal. Impure World Reincarnation could blur the line between life and death. Sealing jutsu opened deep, practical applications, and the cursed seal was a key to advanced biological modification. Ted had already come a long way down the path of biomodification. He'd started with basic alterations learned from Professor Quirrell and Lord Voldemort, then progressed through alchemy learned in the Full Metal Alchemist world. He'd created Softy, the world's first gelatinous slime, and done crossbreeding, magic-guided mutation, and alchemical fusion to replicate and improve several magical beasts, even enhancing werewolves. With the Cursed Seal's principles, he could reach true mutation fusion, melding beneficial mutations so subjects evolved specialized bodies and energy systems. The possibilities were intoxicating and terrifying. Ted intended to devote himself entirely to research. He had a treasure trove of material. What mattered was the science, not destiny or fate. Voldemort? Celestial alignments? Keep out of his way. He was too busy. But he couldn't disappear completely. Hermione was still with him. She'd lied to her parents, pretending there was a school holiday event in Diagon Alley, and told them she needed to stay in town a while. Mr. Granger, trusting and proud of his well-behaved, clever daughter, never suspected. Mrs. Granger seemed more wary. When Hermione left with a small suitcase, she quietly told her to be careful and even slipped a pack of contraceptives into Hermione's luggage. Ted reacted with mock indignation. Am I that kind of person? But he kept quiet. Despite past legalities, some things were meant to be savored. Because of Hermione, Ted set aside immediate magical research. Women did complicate plans for power, he thought with a half grin. The two shopped and wandered. Diagon Alley, Nocturne Alley, though the wizarding shopping scene was limited. Ted had already explored most of it in his first 10 days, so they also visited the Muggle side, malls, amusement parks, bookstores, museums. Hermione bought dresses and even picked out shirts for Ted. Back in Diagon Alley, Dobby the Goblin sent Ted a whispered tip. Someone in Nocturne Alley was selling little fairies. Little fairies were rare magical creatures in Europe, almost unseen in Britain, Sweden, or France. Ted had never seen one in the Forbidden Forest. At most, they were mentioned in passing by the few researchers who studied obscure fae. They were tiny, usually only a few dozen centimeters tall, like miniature people with delicate dragonfly wings, sometimes wearing leaves or flower garments, able to perform simple magic and subsisting on wild fruits. The appearance of a little fairy for sale could only mean smuggling. Ted didn't much care for the trade of merpeople or goblins, but little fairies were different. They had been absent locally for centuries. If someone was trading them, they had to be stopped. Hermione came along, excited. Ted, I've never seen a little fairy before. All right, he told her. Put on the magic mask, don't speak, and follow my lead. Yes, sir, she replied with a mock salute. Ted's homemade magic mask blocked most detection and, combined with a black cloak he'd enchanted with mind power, misdirection, Hermione's whole silhouette shifted, her height, posture, demeanor blurred to observers. Ted casually used transfiguration to alter his own face, becoming a tall, middle-aged man. Together, they slipped into Nocturne Alley. Robert's potion ingredients shop was their target. Behind it, the transaction took place in a cluster of houses. Ted and Hermione moved to the back and activated invisibility for their footsteps and voices. Ted held Hermione's hand and communicated through mind power as they picked their way past magical wards and disguised alarms, easily bypassed by him. The place looked like a small, illegal warehouse, a few square meters from the outside, but expanded internally with an undetectable extension charm into something big enough to be a factory. Ted had never dared that level of expansion when he modified his own house. Inside were cages and holding pens, ferocious beasts, drugged goblins used as cheap testing subjects, all quiet and listless. In a corner, 5 little fairies huddled in a gilded birdcage. 10 minutes later, someone, an anonymous tipster, reported the illegal extension and dangerous creatures to Diagon Alley's patrolling wizards. Patrols and Aurors arrived, rushing toward the warehouse. Ted smiled inwardly. Anonymous good deeds required no thanks. Hermione peered into the cage and tried to speak. The 5 little fairies, 2 males and 3 females, were terrified, packed in the back of the cage. They didn't know English, but as soon as Ted approached, they brightened and flew forward without fear. One with a tiny flower crown flitted to the cage and reached for Ted's cloak. Hermione crossed her arms and scowled. somehow offended by the tiny creature's boldness. Ted's charm, art, and mind power affected simple minds strongly. He released the 5 fairies and offered them tiny magical delicacies. Their appetites were so small that crumbs would feed them. The food won their trust instantly. The little fairy who'd grabbed his cloak, Lulu, perched happily on his shoulder. They didn't speak English, only a little Swedish, but Ted could communicate beyond language. He learned they'd come from a little fairy settlement in Sweden that had been attacked by a monstrous predator. In the chaos, a wicked wizard had captured them, drugged them, and smuggled them to Britain to sell. Hermione's anger melted at that. "We have to help them," she said. "Please, Ted? Lulu and the others are so pitiful." Lulu, sensing Hermione's kindness, flew over and kissed her cheek. Hermione beamed. "Of course," she said. "It won't be hard. We'll treat it like a trip." Ted agreed. "Pack lightly. We'll need 3 or 4 days." Hermione hurried off to prepare, thrilled at the prospect of traveling together. Ted packed more carefully, magical tools, alchemical gear, and a few weapons. His instincts were buzzing. His level 3 prophecy prickled at the back of his mind. This would not be a simple journey. A quest notification chimed in his head. Ding! Quest triggered. Escort home. Good deeds done to the end. Since you met, it's fate. Since you're here, it's time. You can't just leave them behind. Goal: escort Lulu and the 5 little fairies home. Reward: 600 experience, card, fairy seed. The traffickers who sell people must pay. Sweden wasn't far. Magic would get them there in under half an hour, but a blue-quality quest promised complications. New chapter, new work. Time to get moving. Chapter 363, Meeting an Old Acquaintance in a Foreign Land. Sweden, in Northern Europe, once had its moment of dominance. Everyone knows the tales of the Norse Vikings who pressed south to Rome and left their mark. In 1815, at the Congress of Vienna, Sweden declared itself permanently neutral, a stance it maintained through both world wars. That neutrality wasn't the only reason it avoided the great conflicts of the 20th century. If you have no strength, who cares what you announce? Sweden's ancestors were no strangers to war. In the Middle Ages, they even exported mercenaries, selling their sword work across the continent. Stability, a measure of real power, and a bit of luck all played their parts. And of course, Alfred Nobel was Swedish. Ted and Hermione first traveled to Denmark through the Ministry of Magic's International Flu Network. For the moment, that was as far as they could go. There were no direct connections from Great Britain to Switzerland, so they had to break their journey. Denmark sits close to Sweden, however, and crossing the strait was straightforward. The Danish flu office was in a narrow 3-story building. Ted completed the international travel paperwork with the help of a young wizard behind the counter. He was in his 20s and, to Ted's surprise, recognized them. "Aren't you Hogwarts champion? Ted, right? And Miss Granger?" He fumbled Hermione's last name but flashed a grin that was part starstruck fan, part officialdom. Hermione merely smiled and nodded, letting it slide. The young man hovered around Ted, polite and chatty, delighted that he'd watched Ted on the Magic Net Utopia. Fame had its odd benefits. Thanks to the assistant's eagerness, they cleared customs in half an hour. Even the short, stout supervisor, a man in his 40s, was unusually courteous, encouraging them to enjoy Denmark's scenery before moving on. By that afternoon, Ted and Hermione reached a small town in northern Sweden, roughly between Kebnekaise and Lake Tornatresk, not far from Lulu's little fairy settlement. The little fairies' social structure resembled humans. Each settlement had a fairy king and a fairy queen, with the queen typically wielding more power. Lulu's settlement counted dozens of little fairies and even a few other elemental spirits. Centuries ago, there had been whole goblin kingdoms. Here, goblin being a catch-all for elemental beings, fiends, and spirits, not Gringotts' goblins. Shakespeare had once used the idea of a goblin court in A Midsummer Night's Dream, but that was ancient Athens, not northern Sweden. Lulu and her companions were ecstatic being so near home. They wanted to hurry and properly entertain Ted and Hermione, but Ted held back. The trouble Lulu had mentioned sounded serious. He wasn't going to barge in without first checking. "Not yet," he told them. "You said something has been bothering you. Dark wizards or—" "Something bad is disturbing our lives," Lulu whispered. "We think a spirit is here. It appeared out of nowhere, and it's been spoiling the magic around us. It even gathered followers among the humans, people who started polluting the forest. I once saw them, 10 miles away, but I saw them kill some men and women in a sacrifice. That thing is terrifying. Have you seen what it looks like? Ted asked. No. Lulu clutched her tiny chest. I was shaking with fear a long way off. If I had seen it, I'd faint. Since none of them had seen the spirit up close, its origin was a mystery. Still, the effects were concrete. Elemental creatures, fairies, sprites, and the like are formed from the accumulation of magic. When the local magical composition is disrupted, they can't survive. The little fairy settlement could be a formidable force when united. The more of them gathered, the stronger they became. Their fairy queen, for instance, would be at least as powerful as an elite auror or a professor. For something to throw an entire settlement into chaos and contaminate the land's magic, it could not be dismissed as weak. Ted told Hermione to stay at the inn with Lulu and the others while he went into town to find any local wizards who might know more. Sweden's wizarding population was thin. Great Britain might have around 30,000 witches and wizards. Sweden had fewer than 6,000 registered. Northern Sweden, close to the Arctic Circle, was especially sparse. Fortunately, the fan effect from the Danish flu office had paid off. There was a small wizarding gathering place in the town, a pub where locals and wanderers met. Wizards from within a 100-mile radius would drop in. Ted found it quickly by following a map. Charms at the entrance repelled muggles and kept the place discreet. The sign over the door read, "Herring Pub. Oh my God." Inside, the pub was warm and cozy. Raw wooden floors and beams, walls hung with trinkets and a couple of stuffed heads, a glowing elk and a boar, enchanted to serve as lamps. The proprietor, a mustachioed man in his middle years, looked up at the bell. "Another stranger," he said. "Well, what can I get for you?" Ted peered at the chalkboard menu. "I'm starving. What do you recommend?" The owner puffed up. "Been here 20 years. Everything's good, especially my pickled herring. No smellier herring for 50 miles around." "No thanks," Ted said immediately. "All right, drinks." Before Ted could answer, someone's voice called out, "Get him a glass of orange juice." Fleur Delacour stood in the doorway, the pub's dim light helloing her. Her silver-white hair shimmered. She looked like a goddess caught in dusk. Even through a travel veil, her beauty cast a hush across the room. She sat at the small table beside Ted as if she had never left Beauxbatons. "He can't handle alcohol yet," she said with a teasing smile. The owner glanced between them. "You two know each other then?" "Wait, 5 minutes." Ted asked, "What are you doing here?" Fleur laughed, as if it were the most natural thing to see him in Sweden. "I invited you to be a guest at Beauxbatons, and you never came. Were you waiting for me?" Ted grinned and teased back. "Like you could be expected to follow me all the way to Sweden." "I invited you," she repeated with mock indignation. Then her tone became businesslike. "I'm here because 5 French muggles vanished while traveling in Sweden. They likely fell victim to a magical incident. The French ministry's disaster management department is short-staffed. I'm an intern, but I came ahead to start an investigation. My colleagues will arrive in a few days." "You're investigating this on your own?" Ted said, surprised. "France is in chaos at the moment," she replied. "So I came first." They ate quickly. Ted ordered a ridiculous array of dishes: cinnamon roll, Swedish meatballs, 2 pies, shrimp and caviar salad, stewed venison, and packed some for later. Fleur, of course, hadn't ordered anything. She was freeloading with the usual effortless charm. Ted could have protested, but friends, plus Fleur's beguiling smile, made him give in. She delighted in it. After the meal, Fleur offered to accompany Ted to check on Hermione. "We're in a foreign country," she said. "It's rare to meet. Besides, we might need each other." Back at the inn, Hermione eyed Fleur coolly while eating the packed food. Fleur had greeted them, explained the missing French travelers, and then booked a room rather than disappearing. Hermione's voice was dry. "You came back after a single meal?" Ted tried to defend himself. "I'm innocent." Hermione sighed, but she was not unreasonable. Fleur's presence was curious, and the way she clung to Ted would only provoke Hermione's competitive streak. The 3 of them glowered and bantered like an old, familiar triangle. Ted would have preferred to scream, "Stop fighting, you two!" The next morning, Ted decided to get on with the task rather than indulge the simmering rivalry. He released over 1,000 alchemical-guided flying insects, tiny, green bean-sized scouts, to reconnoiter the area. They flew through the hills, checking magic nodes and natural gathering points. Places like that could cause illusions, disorient travelers, or store images. He descended cautiously. They reached a large tree rooted against a mountainside. Lulu and the other fairies fluttered to it and began to dance. The space behind the trunk shifted, like a pocket of expanded space, revealing the little fairy gathering point. A flurry of tiny figures with spears and bows streamed out. When they saw the fairies who had once been abducted returning, they cheered. Little fairies were simple and direct with their emotions, sometimes silly, often sincere. A system chime rang in Ted's mind. Ding, task or home, completed. Reward, 600 experience, card, flower fairy seed. Ted blinked. That was it? He'd expected more fanfare. Maybe Fleur's presence had complicated things. She was always a wild card, far more troublesome than a few dark wizards. Still, the settlement had been happy to be reunited. Then another notification sounded, more serious. Ding. Task triggered. A suddenly appearing evil spirit, enticing mortals, demanding sacrifices, and polluting the magic of the land. You have learned of its existence from 2 independent sources. Whether you came to help an old friend or to aid the little fairies, you must now act. Objective: remedy the harm caused by the Black Forest spirit. Reward: 1,200 experience. Random card, choose 3 from 5. Blue. What kind of creature thinks it can show off before an expert? Ted smiled grimly as everything clicked into place. So that's why they'd been waiting for him. The escort mission had been completed far more smoothly than Ted expected. Lying in bed that night, he reflected on it and decided the blue quality rating was fair. If he hadn't been something of a celebrity in the magic world himself, it certainly wouldn't have gone so easily. Getting out of Great Britain, across Denmark and Sweden, finding this little town, then finally locating the settlement, that should have been complicated. It wasn't, and that worried him more than it pleased him. If it had been anyone else, it wouldn't have been done in less than a week. The 600 experience points from the mission were nothing to write home about. Even though it was the holidays and the 27 network had spread everywhere, the ideal land already gave Ted roughly that amount every day. The real interest was the reward card, Flower Fairy Seed, item card. A packet of 5 seeds can grow extensive patches of 27 flowers. With careful nurturing, many flower fairies may be born. Note, too many flower fairies are not a good thing. They are very troublesome. It was a small packet, no bigger than fit in one hand. Neville would like this. He could study it when they got back. If the fairies turned into a nuisance, they could bother Neville about it. Originally, Ted had planned to plunge into the forest and have a proper scrap with whatever 7 creatures lurked there, just to blow off steam after being stuck between 2 very persuasive women and not being able to hash out life and ideals to his satisfaction. He gave up on that when he ran into another group. It wasn't simply a group of muggles. There were 6 people in the party, and one man carried a weird aura of 27, but he was clearly not a wizard. It was as if someone had injected magic into his body to produce an effect, something you usually only saw after a curse or a blessing. He was also clearly leading the others somewhere. Ted saw an opportunity and smiled inwardly. Fellow guide, please stop. No, tour guide, please stop right there. He changed quickly, slipped into the group under a mind mage suggestion and a confundus charm, and blended in. The strange leader didn't notice and assumed the party had always been 7. Ted had deliberately not let Hermione and Fleur pose as tourists with him. He wanted to infiltrate the followers more deeply and observe. Besides, it wasn't safe for them. What if some cultist had an evil intent? Ted couldn't very well hold back if that happened. He left them in the background, invisible with an item, quietly supporting. There were 6 people, 4 men and 2 women. Besides the strange leader, there was a short, stocky single man and 2 young couples, people in their early 20s, classmates and friends who had just started traveling together. The leader said his village was about to hold the annual Midsummer Festival, said it was great fun, and strongly recommended they visit. 3 days would be the minor heat solar term, a special day. One woman in the couples had just suffered a family tragedy. Her unstable sister had turned on the gas, and she, along with their sleeping parents, had died. This trip was supposed to clear her mind. Ted could tell she had problems too, but unlike the leader's obvious acquired strangeness, hers looked innate. If one followed the old Heavenly Dynasty Bazi readings, her chart hinted at an overly strong, unlucky configuration, a lone star of disaster. Ted also sensed a subtle change around her, as if something latent was waking. Since the International Confederation of Wizards announced the third celestial star conjunction, the world had shifted. The changes were both macro and micro, massive yet slow to feel directly, unless, like Ted, you measured half the world's 6 every day. In just half a month, the global 27 concentration had jumped by at least 5.8 percentage points. To put that in perspective, over the past 300 years, the world's 27 had decayed by 3.2 percentage points. In half a month, it had reversed that centuries-long decline and surged past it. If only the A-share market had that kind of rebound. The consequence was that things tied to 27 were growing stronger and more noticeable. Children who might previously have missed a little wizard awakening by a hair were suddenly crossing the threshold. It applied to magical creatures, enchanted environments, and odd phenomena that were just beginning to appear. That grieving woman seemed to be on the verge of awakening something. For Ted, that made her a perfect observation subject. He was suddenly very pleased that this trip had turned interesting. The party drove out to a remote wilderness with breathtaking scenery, rolling green meadows, scattered trees and shrubs, sunlight that painted everything like an oil painting. There was no road further on, but the young leader assured them his fellow villagers would pick them up. He kept glancing at the grieving girl. Ted suspected something ugly, infidelity. The boyfriend looked tired of her. She, fragile and unstable, grasped at any support. The leader was clearly taking advantage. Ted guessed the leader had lured them to Sweden for the girl's sake. The rest were extras. He could tell some of the dynamics because he was a mind mage. Subtle emotional cues were as obvious to him as a lion on a bald man's head. While waiting for the villagers to arrive, the 7 drank at the lone tavern. The others played cards. The strange girl's eyes were distant. Then the woman who was having an affair and the leader exchanged a look, and both left. One said she was going to the restroom, the other to smoke. Ted was connected to Hermione via Mindshare and had set up a small mind communication network to keep them from getting bored. Fleur, curious, prodded in his head, "Ted, hurry and follow them." Hermione was more cautious. "Isn't that risky?" But curiosity won. Both urged him on. Ted sent an 8 to tail the two. From the girl's delighted exclamations in his head, he could tell they were enjoying the show. The leader's cigarette break lasted exactly as long as he said it would. When the villagers finally arrived, they were 2 middle-aged Nordic types, blonde, farmer-tanned skin, wide-brim hats, simple clothes. The leader hugged them warmly, called them uncle, and introduced the group as friends he wanted to bring home for the midsummer festival. The farmers welcomed them wholeheartedly. Their transport arrived, a horse-drawn carriage. The bucolic tableau, straw hats and carriage could have been a century ago. The ride took about an hour to a village tucked between mountains and woods, semi-enclosed and dreamlike. Small wooden cabins, neat fences, lawns, white tents. There weren't many visible electrical appliances, but it wasn't backward. Everywhere Ted saw a circular antler emblem painted in reddish-purple pigment. Good, he'd found the right place. They received a warm, almost ritualistic welcome. Young men and women in white gauzy dresses and flower crowns greeted them, offering what they called the village specialty tobacco. Ted muttered a wordless purification charm and, wandless, drank a suppression potion in secret. He pretended to take a puff, then staggered as if disoriented and collapsed to the grass. That was another reason he hadn't brought Hermione and Fleur in close. Going it alone was sometimes more convenient. The others were affected too. To Ted's surprise, the villagers didn't molest them or take their belongings. They simply let the visitors lie in the sun for an hour. The Arctic near latitude explained the long daylight. Even at dusk, the sun lingered. After the stupor, everything seemed dreamier in the bright light. Ted kept up a steady stream of chat through the Mind Mage link with Hermione and Fleur, trading theories. They also noticed that a few of the local girls were watching Ted with particular interest. His charm was high, and charm wasn't just physical. Even with the mental suggestion covering his cover, people still reacted to him. That evening, a long table was set in the village center. Young villagers distributed food in a communal, utopian fashion. The leader introduced local delicacies as nourishing and rare. Ted tried some of the dishes. They did have a tonic quality, as if prepared with medicinal intent. The leader showered attention on the strange girl. He even drew her a crude sketch and called it a birthday present. It turned out it was her birthday. Her boyfriend hadn't remembered, but the leader had. Classic manipulation. Hermione and Fleur were having a field day with commentary in Ted's head, betting on how long the leader's game would last. Ted kept them focused. "We're dealing with a 27 event. Be normal," he scolded. He guessed 3 days at most. The official festival was in 3 days, and that would likely be the crescendo. Night fell and felt short. Dusk slipped into dawn in a few hours. Nothing happened overnight. The next day, the party grew more relaxed. The man with the green hat paired off with a village girl and went into a tent. Several villagers watched from a distance, as if confirming something. At noon, they ate again, then sat in a circle for songs, games, and dancing. Ted was the center of attention. After a round of music, someone slipped 5 or 6 letters behind him. Fleur and Hermione urged him to peek. He refused. In that moment, the refusal was the point. In the afternoon, more villagers returned with covered cages of different sizes unloaded from a carriage. The leader explained they were lambs for the festival's slaughter. Ted noticed a stronger magical presence from several men who brought the cages. This wasn't the crude injected 27 he'd seen earlier. This was transformation. These men had become half demonic. What was in the cages? Ted was led away and didn't get a chance to see. Hermione offered to check, but 3 villagers guarded the warehouse and no one found an opening. That night, when he looked under his bed, Ted saw a small basin of spilled milk and a tiny scarecrow inside. The leader noticed his inspection and came over. Smiling, he explained, "It's a custom in my village. If a girl fancies a boy, she'll put this under his bed. There's a rose branch inside. She'll soon get what she wishes for." Ted pulled the scarecrow open and found the rose branch. The leader continued, unabashed. "We don't have too many formalities. If both agree, they can do as they please, as long as the girl has started menstruating." The short, chubby single man in the group went green with envy. He had nearly popped a coronary from the longing. If a village girl were willing, he would have given all his savings after 19 years. The strange girl's boyfriend clapped Ted on the shoulder. "Ted, I'm really jealous." Ted thought, "You're jealous of me? I bet you'll be the next one wearing the green hat." That night, one of the green-hatted men slipped out to meet the village girl again and didn't show up for breakfast. The leader only smiled and said, "You know." The others nodded as if it were all part of the harvest. May everyone accumulate a few more years of savings. 379. Sacrifice to the Black Forest. The others understood right away and stopped worrying about where that boy had run off to. As a result, he disappeared. No one saw him again all day. Meanwhile, Hermione and Fleur finally found a chance to use magic to peer into those heavily guarded cages. What they saw made them both go still. Magical beasts. The Muggles had actually captured several real magical creatures. Even minor magical beasts don't hang around humans by accident. If they can be caught at all, it usually takes extraordinary skill or cunning. Ted could tell these villagers were not ordinary people. Many of them were demonized, altered by some strange magic. If you could X-ray them, their insides would probably look wrong. They only kept a human shape on the surface. At night, Rat Brother, whom Ted had sent out, found the missing green-haired boy. He too had been transformed. Ted didn't know exactly what the boy had gone through, but now he was covered in bear fur. If not for the human face, Ted would not have recognized him as a person at all. There was magic in him now, but he was locked in a cage. The transformation ritual had been finished during the day. The villagers started by nourishing their victims. Modern bodies, they thought, were too weak, so they fed them special medicinal meals. Then there was sex. There were many details Ted did not want to dwell on. Those who knew would understand. After that came herbal soup and an anesthetic. With a ritual skinning knife, they cut patterns into the flesh, and the still steaming bare hide was wrapped round the body. Within the ritual patterns on the ground, the hide and the person merged, and the result was a bear with a human face, an artificial magical beast. Ted felt a chill of recognition. He'd read about related practices in Nicolas Flamel's library back in Paris. Some European wizarding circles had once chosen male wizards and, through elaborate rituals, turned them into guardian beasts, creatures who were stronger than many powerful magical beasts, who could briefly return to human form, who had enormous magical resistance and uncanny abilities. Those wizards often consented. They gained longevity and power, and they were tended to by witches, but they gave up human identity. This village's method, though, wasn't that noble. It recalled the old tales of Madame Pankiao, stories of travelers fed strange things and turned by curse into donkeys, and traffickers who donned dog skins over children to make street performers. This was cruel and unnatural, deliberately creating magical beasts to be offerings. Ted could see how the logic had warped over time. Maybe it began with offerings of livestock, then humans, and then, finding ordinary people insufficient, the villagers turned to magical beasts, either by hunting them or, when those proved scarce, by making their own. So that was the green-haired boy's fate. He'd been turned into one of their sacrificial beasts. Ted's guess about the villagers' intentions seemed right, but not completely. On the morning of the second day, the girl who'd been involved with the green-haired boy was led away after he'd invited her into a room marked with ritual patterns. When she came back, feathers clung to her body. The remaining three, Ted, the strange girl's boyfriend, and a short, thick-set single man, were left alone, ignored. At first, Ted thought it might be because he'd refused the advances of the enthusiastically eager village girls. He was wrong. If he had searched the old village chief's memories, he'd have found that he had simply never been on the sacrifice list. The other two men weren't sacrifices either. They were part of the ceremony. The strange girl, however, was being given an altogether different fate. She had been lured from the city, not to be killed, but to be entrusted with a role. On the third morning, their breakfast drink had been drugged. Ted didn't care and drank it anyway. With his constitution and his 10-point advantage, ordinary sedatives barely made him groggy. Still, while they slumbered, the villagers put on white robes. The girls wore gauzy skirts and flower crowns. Several teenage girls carried Ted to a neat wooden house and left a couple of them to look after him. Ted feigned unconsciousness while observing from above through Ansu's perspective, streaming everything to Hermione and Fleur. Fleur seemed to already understand the villagers' plans and whispered to Hermione. The two of them had been hidden in an invisible magic tent for 2 days, safe and ready. While Ted was carried away, the strange girl was taken to the elder. Rat Brother slipped into the house to listen. What he heard shocked them all. The stranger had been brought not as a victim, but as a successor. The shriveled old woman, the village chief, claimed her life was almost over, and that she intended to go meet the true God. There was no one in the village capable of taking her place except the strange girl, who possessed the necessary qualities. The old woman planned to pass the priestly role to her and then die. Whether the strange girl consented mattered little to the elder. Ted and the others were speechless. This wasn't the narrative they'd expected. Meanwhile, 2 unlucky men, bound and gagged, were marched to a cliff 10 meters high. An old man and an old woman were brought to the precipice. They cut their fingers with knives and daubed their blood on a large, oval black stone engraved with an antler emblem. Then, amid the villagers' strange prayers, the elderly couple stepped forward and jumped. The tied men were terrified. With their gags, they could only make muffled sounds. But the ritual wasn't finished. The old chief, flanked by several corrupted, monstrously strong villagers, carried the 2 men and the cages back into the forest. Ted pretended to wake. "What's going on?" he said, acting disoriented. A strange girl leaned close and stroked his face. "You drank too much," she whispered with a smile. Watching the scene through their mental link, Hermione and Fleur's eyebrows shot up. "If I drank too much, why are you tying me up? Untie me," Ted demanded. The girls laughed and said they would, then moved in ways that made Ted's skin creep. They hadn't brought him there to kill him. They meant to keep him around as breeding stock, to use his vigor to produce offspring that would help perpetuate their rituals. The old woman had decided Ted's looks and virility made him valuable for procreation, to add to the offerings and provide successors for their cult. Ted's face hardened. He had his pride. Then, the man who could not be held went to work. He unleashed a mind shock, knocking out the young women and then snapping the bonds. He didn't want to wait and risk Hermione and Fleur losing their temper. They would not be subtle. In any case, Fleur had predicted this when he was taken. She'd even made a bet with Hermione, and she'd won. Once freed, Ted and Hermione acted fast. They rendered dozens of villagers unconscious, and then the three of them, joined by Fleur, followed the procession into the forest. The woods were huge, far larger than any ordinary forest, and if someone unfamiliar had tried to find this place on their own, it would have been nearly impossible. Troops of villagers led the offerings deeper into the trees, exactly what the Black Forest spirit expected. The forest was called a kubus. It stretched into polar latitudes, where in places the sun did not set for a month. And somewhere within its vastness, an extra patch of wood had appeared, a small pocket of forest from another world that had carried with it a spirit. At first, the spirit was neutral, like a wild animal, but the ostracized old woman had encountered it in a dream, and everything had turned. This spirit had not been here long, less than 2 years, but already the village had lost a third of its people. 20 or 30 outsiders had perished in that part of the wood. Over time, the being had changed under the influence of local magic and the villagers' offerings. Where it had once been content to feast on wayward travelers, it now demanded richer fare. Hence the grotesque progression: green-furred bears, feathered women, contrived magical creatures. The spirit had developed an appetite for stronger sacrifices. The procession pushed on for over an hour. The old woman walked at the head, barefoot, in her tattered white robe. Branches shredded the cloth and her feet bled, leaving a crimson trail. She appeared to relish the pain, her face alight with ecstasy. Eventually they reached a different part of the forest, trees with blacker bark, trunks gnarled and warped. The air changed. The forest gave off a cold, trembling feeling. On a large stone platform, the villagers set down the cages and the 2 bound men. The cloths were pulled away to reveal 6 tiny magical creatures: 3 nifflers with their duck-like snouts, a hairless rat with an anemone-like growth on its back, a murtlap, 1 long, twig-like bowtruckle, and a wide-eyed mooncalf. The creatures were small and low in magical potency, but to these villagers they were precious spoils. Their ability to catch even these few was limited. Still, using them as sacrifices felt like an affront. The old woman now stood at the center of the platform. Her robe was torn, her body streaked with blood. She began to chant in a voice that was not quite human, words that rang strange and ancient through the trees. Wind hurried through the forest, leaves rustled, and a dread settled in the air. Even the villagers who had brought the offerings began to tremble. The old woman raised her hands, and the others fled as if driven by some compulsive fear. Something huge was moving through the woods. Branches slid aside as if reflexively, and a monstrous black elk stepped into view. 3 or 4 meters tall, its antlers grotesquely enormous, its whole shape unnaturally proportioned. It moved soundlessly, and when it lowed, the sound was like a distant tearing. The old woman fell to her knees, arms spread, rapturous. "My God," she begged aloud, "consume me." She had counted them all, the 6 captured beasts, the 2 human-crafted creatures, and herself, and saw them as 9 offerings. She smiled and cut the ropes from the 2 bound men beside her, allowing them to bolt. The Black Forest spirit extended a hand the size of a table, scooped up the old woman, and swallowed her whole with a single crunch. She did not scream. Once the taste of blood had roused it, the beast did not stop. With a blur, it turned and chased one of the fleeing men into the trees. Ted stepped forward alongside Hermione and Fleur. "That's the one," he said, nodding toward the elk. His eyes lingered on the antlers. There was a strange, irresistible feeling in his chest, like something calling to him. "What do we do?" Hermione asked, distressed. 2 of the creatures had once been human, and whatever the villagers did to them had left them beyond recovery. "We should take the beasts and let a proper wizard handle the rest," she said. "I don't see any way to restore them." Ted waved his wand. The cages rose, shrank, and slipped into his spatial pocket. He had no patience for leaving the magical creatures here to be eaten. He was more curious, though, about the stag's antlers. Something about them felt faded, like a missing piece of his path. 380. Antlers and tonic. Among the 6 people the strange boy had brought back, 2 were beyond help. The strange girl lay in a dreamlike trance. The village chief's old woman had, before she died, sprinkled a strange powder on the girl's face and left her bewildered. It was some form of spiritual medium inheritance, a mystical dream state that bound the girl to the spirit world. A man and a woman remained locked in cages. For all intents and purposes, they were lost. Even Ted, who prided himself on being an expert in biological modification, admitted there was nothing to be done. Sending them to St. Mungo's would change nothing. That left 2 others, the girl's worthless boyfriend and a short, fat bachelor. The old woman had cut their ropes before her death, not to free them, but to offer them to the Black Forest spirit, little pre-dinner amusements to whet its appetite. In a vast primeval forest like this, how could anyone hope to escape a spirit aligned with the woods? It took the 3 to 4 meter tall Black Forest spirit less than 5 minutes to catch the panicking boyfriend. The forest swallowed direction. In his blind flight, the man had merely traced a wide arc and hadn't gotten far. The spirit didn't strike immediately, but trailed him, making noises that drove the man nearly mad with fear. Ted didn't move. He had already prepared. The Black Forest spirit would come back for its offerings. All he had to do was wait. Hermione and Fleur had gone to fetch the short, fat man. Ted didn't bother with the boyfriend. He was a lost cause. The boyfriend, frantic and barely thinking, stumbled into a wooden cabin he spotted in the trees. How a cabin could exist here in the primeval forest didn't matter to him. A human dwelling promised safety, so he raced inside. The cabin was old and dilapidated, but it contained many household items, tables, chairs, benches, and primitive handmade tools hung on the walls. In an inner room hung furs and fat, dried meat, and preserved carcasses, evidence of repeated human use. The boyfriend saw traces of people like him, modernly dressed and panicked, entering this place before the upright black deer had appeared. He imagined it crouching in a dark corner, its bent limbs in a grotesque posture, hooves bigger than a human head, fist-sized eyes with horizontal orange-yellow pupils, a mouth full of crooked fangs protruding through its lips. Its antlers arched up like a dead tree, touching the ceiling so the house and the thing seemed one. There was no time for thought. The Black Forest spirit had already closed on him. Its claws gripped him, and the great jaw tore into his chest and abdomen. Organs were torn and swallowed, fresh blood and shredded meat dripping down. It was a quick, brutal end. By then, Hermione and Fleur had returned with the short, fat man. Fleur flicked her wand and knocked him out, dropping him to the floor. "I stunned him to make things easier," Hermione said. Then the hunt for the spirit began. Ted had set everything he needed and waited. Minutes later, the huge, twisted black deer slid out of the shadow, pushing aside branches as it came to the stone platform in the clearing. On that platform sat 8 iron cages, the remaining offerings. The thing, still sated from its recent meal and exuding faint black magic like viscous smoke, pried open a cage with ease, pulled out the occupant, and stuffed them into its mouth. Its jaw opened nearly flat like a snake's, lined with fangs of unequal lengths and directions like iron spikes. It ate as casually as a pig, chewing a couple of times and swallowing whole. It tore into a second cage in the same way, then a third and a fourth, until at the 5th it suddenly slowed. It pulled the offering out and examined it instead of eating it. "Brother, the taste isn't right," the spirit seemed to think. Ted's trap was ready. One of the disguised softies, tiny alchemical creatures, shifted from its mundane offering form into a sharp thorn and launched. One of the spirit's fist-sized eyes was pierced clean through, the spike sinking at least 20 centimeters. If it had been a normal animal, its brain would have been punctured. But it was a spirit body. Though badly wounded, it would not die quickly. Worse, several more small softies were still inside its belly. At that same instant, an alchemical array bloomed around the clearing, 20 meters across. Runes lit in the earth and in the air, an array keyed to spirit bodies and to sealing space. Laxing limbs? Hermione cried, flicking out from behind a tree as her invisibility cloak fell away. From a thick branch, Fleur crouched and added, "Repel spirit body." They cast in unison. Elemental creatures were stubborn, and spirit bodies even more so. This Black Forest spirit had otherworldly attributes that blunted ordinary spells. Their magic only harried and distracted, but it was enough. The softies inside the spirit's belly eroded its magic, their tiny bodies feasting on its power. The spirit's face was covered with writhing softies. Trapped in the array and under flurries of spells, it found itself close to helpless. Ted moved in for the kill. The array he'd laid underfoot did more than suppress evil and seal space. It was an alchemical transmutation array. He wanted the spirit's magic condensed into a single usable core. "What beautiful antlers," he murmured as he activated the final phase. The spirit screamed. Wisps of black smoke began to be drawn outward, captured by the array and rearranged in its intricate patterns. The creature tried to fight, planting its front claws and readying to charge, but its belly split and the group of softies inside began devouring it from within. The spirit had no flesh in the conventional sense. Its body was a materialized construct of magic, so though a great hole yawned, no blood flowed. Still, the softies sucked away the life of its magic. The array pressed the spirit to the ground. It could not crawl free. Ted closed his eyes and guided the transmutation with careful hands, wanting to preserve every last scrap of magical essence. The process took over 40 minutes. At last, the black smoke in the array condensed and solidified into a single object, a jet-black antler. "It's done," Ted breathed. He reached out and the antler dropped into his hand, cool, slightly heavy, about 11 inches long, oddly curved and branched with a strange beauty. Its magic density was enormous. It had absorbed the spirit's entire power. No card dropped from the corpse. The spirit had been consumed by the array. But that antler was worth it. According to the system's evaluation, it was at least a top-tier red material, maybe purple. Ted planned to make a new wand. His cedar wand had started to fail him. He couldn't always cast at full strength for fear of damaging it. If Dumbledore had the Elder Wand and Voldemort had Slytherin's relic, Ted wasn't about to be left behind. Making a wand wasn't simply about the core. This antler was half the work done. "Are you finished?" Hermione asked. Ted answered. "Is that what you wanted?" Fleur asked. Ted handed her the antler. She flinched and tossed it back as if it bit. "It feels wrong in my hand, like it wants to attack." "It still needs to be tamed," Ted said with a grin, "but that's manageable." They erased the short, fat man's memory and sent him back to a Muggle town. His recollection of the horrors would be gone. Whether he would be grateful to survive something like that was another matter. Fear and superstition had their strange comforts. He'd survived at least. The strange girl, however, would not be returned to ordinary life. The old woman's powder had forced her into a dream where she'd connected with the spirit world. Though her magic was faint, she was no longer completely non-magical. The village and the girl were entrusted to the local Swedish wizarding authorities. Ding, mission, Black Forest Spirit, completed. Reward, 1200 XP, random cards 5 select 3, blue. 5 blue bordered cards flashed before Ted. He examined them and chose 3. Lazuli Shard Sword, blue, an item card describing a shard sword capable of firing special magical attacks. Witch Profession card, incomplete, blue, a magic card that grants partial inheritance of the witch profession from the Arid continent. Armor Break, a magic card allowing the learner to use attacks that reduce an enemy's armor and magic resistance. Blue cards were no longer of much personal use, so Ted selected cards that would help his friends. That evening at the inn, Hermione suddenly seemed downcast. Ted put an arm around her and asked what was wrong. "I feel so weak," she confessed. "Fleur's magic is stronger than mine." Fleur's Vila lineage and her being 2 years older than Hermione explained much of that. Hermione, coming from a Muggle family, had never been born with a deep reservoir of magic. The last 2 years of replenishing magic with Ted's help had improved her, but she still felt less powerful. When Ted heard Hermione's words, something shifted in him. He let go of her hand and, softening his voice, asked, "So?" "You're to blame," Hermione said, grabbing him and flipping him over, straddling him with a practiced bounce. They kissed, laughed, and stayed tangled long enough that Fleur, who had agreed to wait for them, grew suspicious when they didn't appear for over an hour. "Fleur, give us a bit more time. My body's a little sore after the fight," a muffled Ted called from inside. Fleur left, but kept glancing back. By afternoon, they emerged. Fleur circled Hermione 3 times, Vila senses active, and asked bluntly, "Hermione, has your magic gotten stronger?" Hermione smiled serenely and sipped her tea, throat a little hoarse. "Cough, cough. I've been training very hard." Ted and his friends planned to say goodbye to Lulu and the little fairies and leave immediately, but the fair folk pressed them to stay for a meal. Ted joked they could feed the little fairies for half a year with one of his meals, and they were about to decline when a little fairy sent an urgent message. Another dark wizard was trying to capture fairies nearby. They walked right into their trap. Ted moved quickly and returned within minutes with the would-be captor subdued. He was only about level 8 or 9 and fell under 3 well-aimed spells. Ted planned to hand him over to local law, but a quick memory search on the captive revealed more. The wizard was not Swedish but Norwegian, and about a month earlier, something strange had happened in Norway's magic community. A powerful force had appeared and routed several local heavy hitters. People had died, fled, or scattered. This bald wizard had fled to Sweden to hide, but had come up short of money. When the Black Forest spirit's corruption unsettled the little fair folk, he found them and intended to sell some on the black market. Lulu and the others had been traded through several hands and ended up in Britain, where they met Ted. But there was more in the captive's memories. A gaunt-faced woman with high cheekbones. Someone shouted, "Bella, that's enough!" and a wave of power that had even interfered with Norway's official magic community. The coincidence was unsettling. A mysterious, powerful force, a woman named Bella, and an upheaval strong enough to shake a national wizarding body. Ted didn't plan to storm that lion's den himself. This needed the attention of Dumbledore and the Ministry. He'd report what he'd found and let them handle it.